Hello, everybody. Hi, Charlene. Hi, Quizboard Terrain. Hi, Dungeon Matron. And hi, Campaign Terrain. Good to see you all. Okay, our guests today are Dr. Tom Thompson, resident historian, Kyle Ott from Desk and Dorks, medievalist and epic game designer, and Franco. Hello, Franco.
Hello, Karl.
I just want to point out, like, this is the classic fantasy example of whoever is doing the announcing, whoever has the most titles, is the people you need to be least afraid of. The aura that Franco project. This is so and so. So this is Franco. Like,
Period.
I'm just saying that the aura levels are at maximum right now.
Okay, just to give Franco a few titles, he's a very old friend of mine, and in fact, he's also the first guest on any of our history streams. Also, has an MA in Hospitalary Studies from the University of Malta, and he's the author of Swords of the Religion. When I say I'm old enough to be in a history book, this is the book. Okay, so yeah, what?
Also, I didn't know that we were bringing swords. I would have brought my sword.
Yeah.
I feel like we were live. I feel like Franco came. See, this is why he didn't have a title. Franco came prepared. He had one sword. I have no swords.
I'd have to go down to my son's bedroom. He has a corner full of swords, which, by the way, tells you something that everybody sitting here has swords.
Yep. That's one short. Okay, so today we'll be talking about knights on ships. But before we do that, I've just got 3 quick announcements, if you don't mind. So first one up is Strength Mode September, which is an initiative by Val from Corkboards and Curiosities and Indestructible. So basically what that's going to be is a month of adventure-themed fitness stuff, basically. So you can expect to find some content coming that way. And yeah, I posted the link to the introduction stream in the chat, so you might be able to check it out later. I will also put the links in the comments later on. Next up, our good friend Peter from Tales from Elsewhere, who was also a guest in this stream a few months back, is starting his Kickstarter for Clockward in a couple of days, and you can check it out here. So this is a Weird West action horror role-playing game. This is not sponsored. I'm just shouting it out because I want this book to exist. I want this book to exist so I can buy it because the artwork is fantastic and the rules sound awesome. Okay, last up, I've spent the last few weeks teaching the Dark Arts to Quizboard Terrain and Dungeon Matron, and they have set up a new stream. And the first episode went live last Wednesday. I think this will be a regular Wednesday thing. And you can check it out at the following link. Oh. Hi, Lucy Collected. Good to see you. And yeah, with that, I think we can get started with the stream proper. Okay, that was a cue for one of you to...
Okay. It's a cue for one of us to say something insightful.
Yeah. I was feeling as an uncomfortable silence approaching.
Yeah, that's okay.
So sort of like being becalmed, right, as you watch the galleys approach.
Yes.
That's a good point. And Franco, in the notes you sent us, there was a particular episode which really struck me, and it was literally the opposite of becalmed. How about you start from there?
You mean the thing where a monkey kept someone alive and sane?
Yes.
Oh, Franco, you know about my career. Yeah. That's so nice. I feel seen.
Well, I think what do you want to know about the storm and the monkey?
That's a story.
Might be a good start for the stream, I guess. So Valletta before the Great Siege of 1555. There was this guy called, well, his nickname was Romegas. His full name was a bit more of a mouthful. He was a French knight. His other nickname was the Wolf of the Sea. The Ottomans and the Greeks and the whole population of the Barbary states weren't pretty much fond of him. Well, the story Karl is referring to is there was a huge storm in Malta, basically in 1555. Lots of ships were destroyed, and one of the corsair ship, the galley which Romegas was captain of, was shipwrecked in the harbor. Basically, after a few days, I believe, he was rescued because they heard tapping at the bottom of the hull because the ship overturned. And cutting a long story short, the rescue teams punched a hole in the bottom of the hull, and up popped. I don't know who popped up first, whether it was Romegas, the captain, or the monkey.
It was
so
the monkey.
Karl's, it was specified as the monkey.
Yeah, it was specified in Bosio.
Okay, so Bosio actually specifies that the monkey popped out. So that's a way to keep someone alive. Apparently Romegas was the typical corsairing captain with a pet monkey on his shoulder, which is something you would think is a fantasy thing, but was reality. And that's just one of the many characters who, basically waged holy war on Muslim shipping. This was in the 16th century, which I guess is what we're going to be talking about today.
One of the things that I think I wanted to ask about was because, as Kyle said before the show, it's sort of like you're sort of familiar with the Templars and the Hospitallers sort of when they're in the Holy Land, and the Templars disappear, obviously, but that change from a land-based power to a sea-based power, that transition, I think, is one of the most interesting things to me, because it's like none of the military orders have done that before. Yep. So, I noticed a couple of things. One was that when they first went to Rhodes, it seemed like, at least from the notes that you gave us, it seemed like they had galleys, because you always have to have galleys, but they also had a fair number of real sailing ships. But then when they moved from Rhodes to Malta, it seems like they just went all in on the galleys. And you said like their biggest sailing ship, which everybody was very impressed with, they actually like stripped down and just let it go. So I guess my question is, when they went from being a traditional land-based, what we would think of as a normal sort of medieval situation, did they just fly by the seat of their pants, or was there a model? I mean, obviously, because of where they were, they got to be in contact with the Venetians, the Genoese. Are they talking to any of these people? And I guess is the thing that sort of made me think about this is that later on, the idea is that the admiral has to be an Italian.
Yeah.
Which makes sense geopolitically, just because of where Malta is. But
yes,
but I was just wondering if there was really like, hey, we're going to send somebody to Venice. Tell us how to become a sea power.
I mean, if you're going to learn it from anybody,
go. That's what I'm saying. The resources are there. I just don't know how much of a plan there was.
What's amazing about the Hospitallers, which, by the way, you could say they still exist today, is their ability to regenerate as an organization. As you well know, because you know much of the details of the Holy Land era, they made fortifications a thing because of the difference in numbers, and they sort of led the way with the technology and fortifications, etc. when they lost the Holy Land, 1291, they had a choice to do. The first choice was run away to Cyprus, which was what everyone else did, I guess, and seek shelter in the nearest kingdom close to the Holy Land. But what made them different than other orders, which we could say the closest comparison are the Templars, is that they seem to have quickly changed their tactics,
The modes of operation. Yeah.
Their modes of operation. That's exactly what I wanted to. So basically, they were in an island. They wanted to keep waging holy war. They couldn't invade, as you know, the Holy Land successfully, or they attempted to by all the holy leagues that followed after, etc. But in order to keep existing and not be destroyed, but like their cousins were in the early 14th century, they seem to have immediately built a navy. I mean, they started building the navy in Cyprus, and they already had a navy, if you could call it a navy, because it was like hospitaller-owned transport ships,
More
which
like
were only used for transport.
kind of more of a merchant navy rather than a military navy at that point.
Yes. I mean, to bring supplies from Europe to the Holy Land, etc. But they seem to have adapted those and started using them to attack Muslim shipping, basically. That was the easiest thing they could have done, which they did very effectively up till Malta in the 18th century. What seemed to be the turning point was the beginning of the 1300s, when the Templar seats became getting hot. Excuse the pun. There was lots of political and economical pressure on these military orders because they're useless now. We don't need them anymore, etc., etc. The
They're
Spanish
also threats to our
orders,
established power.
broke French kings wanting money, and things like that.
Franco, at the same time, wasn't that a massive influx for the Hospitallers? Because King Philip took the Templar holdings that were in France, but
Oh yeah.
yeah, everything else was split up between the Pope and the Hospitallers. So.
Yeah. The Pope seems to have felt guilty, and sort of God told him to give some or most of the other Templar assets to the Hospitallers, and the Hospitallers just had to accept, okay.
Sure as well.
Yes, but coincidence, they invaded Rhodes because Cyprus was getting a bit too. There was already a kingdom in Cyprus; they couldn't operate freely. There were the local nobles, there was the king of Cyprus, etc. So they were not free there, like they were not technically free in the Holy Land because of all the political dealings in the kingdoms there. In Rhodes, they were full independent, and they got the go-ahead from the Pope. So hey, they took it. They just invaded Rhodes with that little navy they had, which they mustered in Cyprus in the few years they were there. I'm trying to find how many years they were in Cyprus. It was only a couple of years. Yep,
So
like 20 years, Cyprus.
So in those 20 years, they basically converted the navy they had, added more ships, and right?
Yes. There was a lot of help from the Genoese. Obviously they got help. They, as you well know, you wouldn't have like a navy which belongs to your flag. You would have merchantmen, you had corsairs, independent, adventurers, Genoa, having economical interest. So they would say, hey, we'll give you 2 galleys. And that's how it happened. I think it was just a handful of galleys which invaded Rhodes in 1310. I'm trying to look how many they were, but I think there was like 3 galleys and a few other ships. Nothing much. But when they left Rhodes after the siege in the early 1500s, it was a fleet of 50 ships. So after 200 years, it was obvious that their holy war at sea was economically, flourishing.
No kidding. But I also
So one of the, sorry, just to jump in really quick, one of the things that you're saying, Franco, that I love, and we did a video on the Crusades just as like an RPG concept, and it's one of the things that people kept giving me guff for is like, it's a religious conflict, it's a religious conflict. I'm like, yes, but it's an economic conflict more than it's anything, because that sea area is so. Whenever someone's like, oh man, the battles on the Crusades on land, and I'm like, are greatly dwarfed by the battles at sea and the importance of naval. What? I'm sorry. What was that? I couldn't. Who said that? Right. And it's like one of the things that I love about the Hospitallers or the Hospitalier, however you want to say it. I keep getting guff from people being like, it's not the Hospitallers. I'm like, it isn't it though? Am I saying it right? If I say Hospitallers, am I saying it right?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
so.
See, all right, I got the pass. Franco's a Hospitaller historian from Malta. That's being a hit. It's like being a historian from history land. That's like in terms of like this order. But like the reason I love them so much as an order is like when you compare them to other like military or militant faith orders, like the Teutonic Knights or the Templars, whatever. The other orders don't seem to ever adapt. And the Hospitallers do, right? Where it's like, oh, we are getting our asses kicked on land. Ocean it is, boys. Or like, wow, we are vastly outnumbered in a hostile environment that literally saps the strength that we are ill-equipped for logistically. Man, fortifications go burr. Let's just do some, like, that's why I love them, because they're just, and that's, you know, we can argue that they're like still around today. Like, obviously they, you know, there are still members of them that exist, but like I think the reason they still exist is they were like, nope, we're just going to adapt every single time. It's like, we're not going to stick to the way it was. Nope. Have fun, everybody in Cyprus. We're going to Rhodes. Bye. I don't know. That's part of the reason I've loved studying them, is like every time a problem comes up, I don't know if it's like and maybe you could shed some light on this, Franco. I don't know if it's the way that their order is set up. I don't know if it's the way that leadership is trained. I don't know if it's the cultural values that are instilled when you become a Hospitaller, but there's something about them that seems less rigid and more adaptable than any other militant order that I had studied, which is part of the reason that I've gravitated towards them. And I don't know what that characteristic is that gives them that edge, but that clearly does seem to be the edge historically from all the stuff that I have looked at.
What I think gave them a really good edge is, like you just mentioned it, actually, their background. The Templars were really, well, they were very good at what they did, but they were very rigid in their existence, raison d'etre, you know. I mean,
yeah,
they were purely military and economical, but, you know, that was it. The Teutonic Knights, okay, they were like sort of a German, not offshoot, but they copied the Hospitaller formula, sort of.
Legally distinct, but
the
heavily
Order of
inspired.
St. Lazarus did the same. Sorry, Karl, sorry.
No, I said
keep going.
No, I was saying the Teutonic Knights are basically legally distinct, but heavily inspired by the Templars. The Order of St. Lazarus, I think, was more inspired by the Hospitallers, but at the same time, they had a very short shelf life, by definition.
Yes.
To quote the kids these days, the Teutonic Knights do seem to be the Templars' reheated nachos.
Okay.
Okay, but the other thing, as Franco mentioned, is that if I remember correctly, the level of education among Hospitallers was much higher than that of Templars. Again, because one recurring theme you keep seeing is that among them you find lawyers, doctors, scientists, what have you. They're also fighters, don't get me wrong, but they kept cultivating that kind of intellectual side of things.
They have a mixed background because, okay, the Amalfi merchants in early 11th century, and then there's the mysterious Blessed Gerard, who's the French founder, and then they followed the Augustinian rule, and the Augustinian rule is, you would say, one of the more worldly monastic orders compared to the others, which get locked up in a monastery, etc. And then I think the winning part, which is why they still exist today, and I can safely say they still exist officially today. There was a bit of a dotted line after Napoleon for 20, 30 years, which created 3 offshoots. But the main offshoot, which is in Rome, is still from the same lineage. The main thing that kept them alive is hospitaling. So offering hospital assistance, hospitable assistance. So they kept the same formula from Jerusalem, accepting any fate. And even when they were homeless, they offered medical assistance wherever they went. So any leader of any state would welcome them simply because of that thing, let alone the fact that they have a militia group in their harbor which is friendly to them. But offering medical assistance, in my opinion, is probably what helped them survive. Because wherever they went, it was policy to build a hospital. And it was policy to have the hospital open for everyone, including Muslims and common folk, which, in the medieval time is quite avant-garde.
That's progressive. That's progressive. That's progressive by today's standards sometimes.
I just read Douglas Porch's book on the conquest of the Sahara, and he makes the point that while there are Europeans that are deep in the Sahara at times, the only group of Europeans that would normally survive or would have a decent chance of surviving would be those who could offer healing.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. So he said, it doesn't guarantee anything,
well,
but you have a better chance of surviving.
It helps.
Yeah. But again, that comes back to sort of what we were saying before about the fact that as opposed to the Templars, who, again, were kind of monomaniacal about what they did, everything was very focused.
Yes.
The horizons weren't that broad. It was like, we're going to get this caravan through and whatever.
Exactly.
Just the fact that the Hospitallers actually prioritize medical knowledge, really does set them apart. Because it's broader horizons.
For sure. The military aspect, as you well know, in the Holy Lands, it was more evident, was the secondary thing. Rather than like the Templars, the military aspect was the primary thing. So you could say the Hospitallers were more defensive than offensive, but that's just, putting it a bit too broadly.
They tended to be somewhat more, they were support as opposed to tip of the spear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Logistical support.
Which changed when they started floating ships.
Yeah.
And then they went really, I think it really pissed them off that they got kicked out of Acre, and they just wanted to kick some enemy ass, and they just kept doing it until Napoleon told them to stop, basically.
Okay, so let's talk about
and they survived because they stopped their military aspect and just kept the hospitaller aspect, and they still do it today in the borders of Ukraine and Syria and everywhere else, officially.
Okay, let's talk about Rhodes. Yeah. So basically, how long were they there again?
200 years, 1310 till 1522.
Okay, so basically, they've got this base in Rhodes. They fortified the hell out of it. In fact, once they moved from there, their later writings is like, yep, we built some nice fortifications, but they're not Rhodes. They had their fleet there. They ran operations out of there, and just 5 feet away across the water is one of their main enemies, the Ottoman Empire. So it's like, at some point, I believe Suleiman the Magnificent decided, I don't want these guys over here, right?
Well, it happened twice. They 1480, they were besieged by the Ottoman Empire in 1480, and they resisted and they were victorious. But then, obviously, in 1522, it was a much bigger effort, and they lost. Obviously, because yep.
No, I was going to say part of that is just facing, geopolitical reality.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm amazed they lasted 200 years.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. I mean, because the Ottomans, they're they don't have to take Constantinople. They'll bypass it and keep going if they need to. So you know that they aren't going to stop.
Yeah.
But I think it says something pretty good about the leadership in the 1520s. Is they looked at this and said, look, we're just going to get engulfed. This is not going to do anybody any good.
Yeah.
You know,
I am shocked that they lasted that long. Like, just thinking about how long foreign powers last within an established borders, like it's insane that they were there, like that they were dug in like that.
Yeah. They also followed the formula of the Holy Land for settlers. So they needed people. So a bit like offering, well, not a bit like, that's what it was, offering lands to Europeans who wanted to, have a better life elsewhere in the border with a very huge superpower which wants to kill you. But anyway, that's a bit like the American Wild West. But yeah, they had lots of settlers, lots of Genoese settlers as well, obviously, that because of the alliance.
I was going to say, did they seem to have had a special relationship with the Genoese?
Only in Rhodes, but yes, there seems to have been a lot of agreements with Genoese merchantmen and Genoese corsairs, but the order, don't forget, was multinational. So Genoese powers it was just the presence at the time, including the Venetians, but the Venetians seem always to have hated the Hospitallers.
Yeah, I think that was a recurring theme throughout their history.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and again, if there is a special relationship between the Hospitallers and the Genoese, that in itself is enough to make the Venetians hate them.
Yeah. Yes. You're taking sides.
Exactly. I mean, outside of the strategic situation of, look, we're Venice, and our trade routes need to go to the Eastern Mediterranean, and these guys are sitting in our path.
Exactly.
I think it's amazing that the Venetians never laid siege to Rhodes.
Well, the Pope was the boss of the order.
But the Venetians have a history of not caring what the Pope says.
Yeah. Fair enough.
See Fourth Crusade.
Is it that they didn't?
Yeah, exactly.
Is it that they didn't? Is it that they didn't want to take them out, or was it just that it wasn't economically viable for them to take it out? Like, my thing with the Venetians is always like, if the bread isn't good, they just don't, like, they're like a spreadsheet with weapons. Like, every time they're just like, yes, if money not go burr, war not happen. Like, like that's that. I don't know. Maybe that's like a very simple thing, but it seems like every time.
Maybe Rhodes was just an irritant, but not a
certainly, right? Like, you're not going to worry about the splinter when the tree is falling on you.
Exactly.
Like, yeah, like they have bigger fish to fry that are more important for getting their money up than Rhodes. They're like, all right, whatever. Let the funny little religious men traipse around in their armor and chant in Latin. We're making stacks over here. Like, literally, I've often thought that about the Venetians, just in general, in this time period, where it's like, if the money's not good. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So I'm not far off then. All right.
I guess it kind of
crazy religious fanatics, let them fight their holy war while we sort of
while we're stacking bread.
Yeah, and as long as the Genoese don't get to use Rhodes in any of their wars against us, there's no military reason to take
which
them.
they couldn't, because the one of the things about the Hospitallers statute was that they had to be politically neutral in European wars.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, there we go.
Yeah.
Case closed.
Which also might explain why the Hospitallers were far less like willing to get into fights in this period then, because they're like, a lot of our safety is rests on us being neutral to certain parties.
Oh yes. The neutrality was holy, was very important for the Hospitallers, because they were multinational. They had assets all over Europe, and they didn't want to step on anybody's toes. Obviously, you have the individual Hospitaller general or military man who would go back to his country and serve his king, but that would be like closing one eye, because he would be like the Frenchman, not the hospitaller, serving
Mhm.
somewhere.
Not in his
But,
capacity as a knight kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but the order only went allied with the European states when there was a holy league against Islam, basically, because that was their, crusading raison d'être. And yeah, from Rhodes, they did lots of that. I mean, they kept it up. We've got a few dates here, which I'm trying to find, but.
Well, while you're finding those, I do want to point out that like this is kind of like critical to the whole crusading period, is that like fighting Europeans is a big no-no for the church. And like there is a massive economic reason to be in the Holy Land, because nobody cares if you kill the Muslims, which is a terrible thing to say, but like that is the mindset, right? It's like if you go after your neighbor and their land and their fiefs and their holdings, then yeah, you're going to be excommunicated, you're going to be fought against, you're going to be besieged. But nobody cares if you do it in the Levant. Nobody.
If you have to kill somebody, go to the Eastern Mediterranean and kill somebody.
It sounds awful, but like this is like the humans get a human thing that keeps popping up. Like if you have to kill somebody and you're in a culture that's okay with it, you got to make sure they don't look like you. And I'm like, oh, that's like, but that the fact that reasoning still hasn't changed in hundreds and hundreds of years is just like, well, yeah, that's
our tribal part, which never goes away.
Right.
It's like exactly.
I have a question
it's like
from
deep in the brain is the lizard bit, and then there's the tribal bit.
Lizard.
Okay, we have a question from Dungeon Matron. So the Hospitallers weren't sworn to any one power. Technically, yes.
The Vatican.
Basically.
Jesus.
Yes.
I am sworn to Jesus.
But even then, I think for most of their history, it was whatever the Vatican said. It was considered to be more of a polite suggestion rather than an order.
Yes. It was like the Godfather, not the daddy. That's why it's very important.
No, well played, sir. Well played. That was beautiful. That was masterfully done. I will be stealing that immediately.
You can. I just made it up. I can't patent it so fast.
I'll give you credit. Don't worry.
But yeah, I mean, it's the Pope was the head of the church, and they were part of the church, but they were a sovereign. They were a sovereign religious military order. But the word sovereign was quite important because it meant they were independent from any other state. They owed allegiance to whoever they wanted to and had to at the time. And it changed as time went, as circumstances changed. I mean, in Malta, they sort of had to owe allegiance to Charles V because he gave them Malta, sort of. He said, okay, have Malta, you need to defend it. Okay. Don't attack my ships. Okay.
It was kind of like the landlord at that point, yeah?
Yeah, it's like
it sounds very feudal, actually. I'm giving you this land in return for military service.
No, it was a vassal, vassal state basically. But it was I don't know how you could compare it. It was like a sovereign vassal state, which wasn't the Viceroy of Sicily didn't like that because Malta belonged to the Viceroy to the Kingdom of two Sicilies at the time, and sort of then these knights come and take it, and now they're sovereign. But yeah.
Okay,
and if you were Charles V, you could be fairly certain that the goals of the Hospitallers dovetailed with yours.
Oh yes.
Yeah. You weren't going to have policy issues with them.
Absolutely.
No. Yeah. And their homeless years was basically a huge diplomatic exercise to keep existing. When I say the homeless years, it was between 1522 and the 1530s when they started them all.
We have another question by Dungeon Matron here. We can tackle that, and then we can talk about the homeless years, because that's the next step in there.
Yeah.
So how were Hospitallers funded?
Wonder. And trade. A lot of trade. I'm sure you can go into the specifics of it, Franco, more than I could, but
Trade,
like
yes.
trade more than
Trade.
anything. Like
Trade, yes, that's
yeah,
what it is.
you're built directly onto literally like the Amazon of the medieval world. Like the Mediterranean is the Amazon of the medieval world.
Yeah.
You have access to Constantinople, you have access to Egypt, you have access to Anatolia, you have access like it literally if you're built on that's part of the reason that like the Crusades are such an economic conflict. Like it like more so than anyone is willing to give credit for, or especially if like people don't like fully understand like what the conflict is. It like trade. It's literally it's trade all of the time. It's everywhere trading all at once. It trade and plunder. That's it. Like they're Vikings with a crucifix. Like that's that's basically it.
That's how the
Those
Venetians
are
describe them.
Normans.
I'm sorry, Franco. What was that?
That's how the Venetians described them. Corsairs parading, pirates parading crosses.
That's such a badass description. That's so
That's the official Venetian.
It goes so hard.
This does bring up an interesting thing. So they had their own. I can't remember what they're called, but you know what? Like, I always think of them, of course, in the Templar context.
Yeah,
but
it's similar.
But in terms of the estates that they held
The commanderies,
in Europe as well.
Yes.
I mean, basically, they ran them the same way that the Templars did, right?
Yes.
I mean,
So
a commandery or whatever it's called.
the commanderies. Yeah, that's it. That's it. Yeah. No.
And did those start to diminish over time? Obviously, they lost the ones in France, but
no, they grew over time. The hospital commanderies started diminishing in the Enlightenment. Basically, they had two sources of funding. One was Europe, milking the European properties, and the other one was attacking the trade routes, which was corsairing. The one was less reliable than the other. So the commanderies were the reliable source of income, and France offered the biggest. I forgot the percentage, but it's nearly half of the source of income from the commanderies to the Order of Malta, simply because the King Philip didn't attack the hospitallers in France, and the hospitallers were as powerful as the Templars, probably in land ownership. He just picked on one organization and was happy with that. And then the Pope said, "You know what? We should stop doing this. It's looking bad." The revenue from the commanderies was a system which worked since they started in the Holy Land. No, I mean there was the noble families, and they would leave the donuts. Not donuts, the people who donate money and property to the order.
The Patreon subscribers of them,
yeah. So, and the order had the vow of, like the Templars, the vow of celibacy, obedience, and poverty, which did not mean they lived in poverty.
No.
It just meant that when you die, all your property goes to the order. And that just kept building up their revenue. Obviously, when you're a knight and you get seniority and you've done your service on the galleys and etc., you have a right that was part of the system. You earn the right to have a commandery, and you can go and retire in Europe in your commandery and become a lord. But they were very, 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 very bureaucratic, and it was quite a stressful thing from what I studied. The head of the commandery had to pay the tax to the order, and they had to sort of work the land. They couldn't just sit there and enjoy.
It had to make money.
Yes. It had to be a lucrative business, and they only kept a small percentage for themselves. I can't remember how much, but it was not. They were monks, so they had to live in poverty. So they had just enough money to live in their luxury, and the rest all went to the order.
If I remember correctly, the Templars at least used to actually send out accountants, basically. To go over the accounts in every
Oh, yes.
commandery to make sure that everything was good. And
Yes.
you know,
Yes. The hospitals had the same system every year. Every year you have to do an audit. Basically, it was literally an audit, and the auditore. And there was the treasurer who would be in Malta or in Rhodes, wherever the headquarters was, and he would receive all these audits of each commandery, and it was quite a serious and organized system. And you're speaking of accountants. Every galley, when they were out corsairing, had to have an accountant, or the clerk.
And that was
his
taken
job was
very seriously.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
If you plundered, if you were a crew member and you plundered, you were whipped and put a year rowing on your galley. So,
Okay. On the other hand, if you're an accountant and you cheat, the punishment was rowing in the galleys for life.
oh, I forgot that part.
I
Well
just
done, Karl.
I just read Liam's Mortal Fortune.
Okay. Yes.
Rowing in galleys for life. I'm still sitting here flabbergasted that they had commanderies lasting to the Enlightenment. I did not know it lasted that
Oh,
long.
yes.
That's insane. I love them even more now. Let's go.
The French, they lost the French properties in the French Revolution. Before the French Revolution, France still gave, I think it was 40% of the revenue of the order. 40%. And the rest was corsairing, etc., and other commanderies.
it's because they you can sort of see this in companies today, but it's like the overhead that's involved in running a multinational firm, right? So yes, you've got all these commanderies, they're bringing in revenue, but there are legitimate costs that you incur in having this kind of network. But on the other hand, all of that is supposed to act as support for the for the Holy War activities.
Yeah.
But you can see, in a certain sense, you can see a gap opening up between the two, right? Because the people who are running the commanderies are like, no, I'm running a commandery. I'm not running a ship. I guess the fact that some of them were retired sea captains would probably help in that. But it is almost like two different economic activities that they're participating in at the same time.
Yes.
I just realized the Hospitallers are like a McDonald's.
Okay.
Yes.
They are. They're a
Yes.
McDonald's with swords. That's
A crusading
amazing.
franchise.
They are. If you do well
I've been
enough
in McDonald's with swords.
working in the McDonald's, you get to
Oh, yes.
franchise a commandery somewhere else that
Okay.
still pays money to corporate so that we can continue our expand. Holy shit!
That actually makes sense. That metaphor is good.
Holy shit! This is what I was saying, Franco. I'm a C+ researcher with A+ enthusiasm. You give me good research, I'll find a way to make the common folks get it. I will. I'll make it happen. But they're a McDonald's with swords.
I love that.
That's awesome.
That's a great way of
They're
putting
one
it. Yeah.
back away. And actually, that doesn't even work because the Hospitallers did occupy part of Jerusalem that was famous for making the fast food of that era. Holy shit, they actually are the McDonald's. I'm done. I quit history. I'm finished. I'm leaving now. This is it. I literally remember like reading some documents from that time. Like, oh yeah, the Hospitallers have a section of Jerusalem, but that section was that there's a thin alleyway where people would have like street meat, basically, that was that they would serve on the cheap to pilgrims, and like multiple orders had to put out notices to be like, hey, avoid this section because you will get sick if you eat the food. And everyone's like, oh, it's because this dirty foreign food. And it's like, chances are it probably isn't. It's probably that your gut microbes, your gut biome isn't used to that. So if you had just traveled to the Holy Land, eating the street cart food is probably gonna mess you up. But the Hospitallers, literally their base is like so close. We did it.
I love that. I'm stealing that now from you.
Please. That's my gift to you. That it's an exchange now. Now we're trading. That's amazing. Yeah, tell your students that they're the McDonald's of the medieval world, and then let me know how that goes, because I want to know how that works.
McDonald's, exactly. I mean, if you perform, you'll be rewarded, and that's what they were.
And the value of the commandery, part of the value is tied to the real estate, which is what the bulk of MacDonald's profit value is from the real estate itself. I cannot. This is incredible. Somebody put Ronald MacDonald in a tabard immediately.
Yeah.
There might be an 8-pointed cross somewhere in the symbolism. Okay, now we're going in down.
The Hamburglar does wear black and white. I just want to say, he's already in the colors.
And the ketchup and the mayo is the red standard with the white cross.
I love history so freaking much.
So let's go back to when the Ottomans attacked the MacDonald's with Swords HQ in 1520. Okay, so Suleiman the Magnificent decided to kick them out, but in a decision that would absolutely not come back to bite him in the ass, he let them retire with honors and with all their equipment, which leads us to the Hopeless Years.
I honestly, Suleiman the Magnificent, oh my God, I think that was the darkest part of his career. How the hell do you win a siege against these fanatics who have been troubling you for hundreds of years and then let them leave? I mean,
with all their weapons and stuff,
yeah, with everything. With like, let me read the statistics. Come on, 5,000 road yachts. So okay, take the local population, the useful local population with you too. Why don't you? A 50 vessel strong army. I mean, all their archives, which are still in Valletta, and all their riches and everything. Just go, leave my section of the Mediterranean. But I actually don't know why. You can say why, because obviously he respected them and it was a very long siege and, he was chivalrous, etc. But that was a pretty dumb thing to do because obviously, the agreement was don't attack us again. And they were like, yeah, sure. I mean, when
the irony there is that, okay, so they're promising not to do the one thing that their organization exists to do.
Yeah.
So they're not going to do exactly that. If I'm Suleiman the Magnificent, I say to them, would you take this offer? And when they come back and say yes, and they're dealing in bad faith, you go, oh, that means you really do believe that I can take Rhodes. So I'm just going to take it. You're all going to die. I'm never going to have to worry about this ever again. That is a terrible. It is arguably a terrible strategic and tactical decision.
Yes.
It's actually one of the things that makes me like Suleiman the Magnificent more as a person, because everything I've read about him makes him seem like kind of the homie. Like, he's like, you know what? This was a great siege. You guys know ball. All right, get out of here, you little scamp. All of the stuff that chivalrous knights like espouse and never live up to seems to be Suleiman the Magnificent.
Pretty much.
Yeah, it's I'm like, guys, how much of this are you actually how much crusading are we just projecting because you hate Suleiman? Because he's everything you're not, which is crazy work.
He was young at the time as well, and probably he was impressed by them and he respected them, etc. When he was older and he attacked Malta, he was a disgruntled, bitter, tired emperor. It's like, oh, come on, guys, and that was a different.
The tone of that siege was definitely very, very different.
It was. I'm gonna wipe you out, and we're not going to stop. But
Well, and again, it's just the fact that Malta is where it is versus where Rhodes is. Yeah. Think how much easier it was to attack Rhodes.
Yeah,
of course.
I mean, get the job. If you're going to attack, why aren't you finishing the job?
Well, here's the thing, right? If we're looking at the Middle Ages as as warriors espousing or trying to live up to a chivalric ideal, or whatever the Muslim equivalent of the chivalric ideal is. I know it has a name in Islam. I don't remember it off the top of my head. There is a code of conduct for Muslim warriors. I know there is. I don't remember the name of it off rip, so I apologize. But if we're looking at that, Suleiman going into that siege wanting to wipe everybody out does make a little bit more sense, because not only did I extend you mercy the first time around, but then you slapped my face in response to my mercy. Like, at that point, maybe he is disgruntled at that point, but I have to think, right, like, especially knowing what I know about Suleiman in his character in general, that there's a lot of like, well, you know what, fool me once, shame on you. I'm not giving you a chance to fool me a second time. I tried to extend mercy. I tried to be good. I tried to be kind. I gave you the warrior's courtesy, and you did not follow that up in suit. And so, cool. Well, death it is, boys. We're putting a Burger King where the medieval McDonald's was now.
Exactly.
Well, but that's kind of the problem, isn't it? Is that it took he stewed about it for 40 years and then screwed it up.
Yes, and still did not matter. But obviously, Malta's closer to Sicily and Italy, and
right. Yeah, no, but that's what I'm saying. It completely reversed all the logistical advantages that he had.
He lost the advantage.
Yeah.
So what changed things in Rhodes, which made the Knights of Malta, Knights of Rhodes, the Hospitallers? That's why we call them the Hospitallers, because they became the Knights of Rhodes, the Knights of Malta. And anyway, what changed was when the Mamluks lost their existence, and the Ottomans took over Egypt, basically. The Hospitallers thrived, like the Crusades. They thrived over the the fragmented Islamic states.
Okay.
When the Ottoman Empire became an empire, and I think the date was
they took Egypt in 1517.
1517, yeah. So that was like a time bomb for the Hospitallers in Rhodes then, because they were surrounded by one state.
It was literally a pincer at that point.
Yeah, they were sandwiched to them. So basically, it was just a matter of time. But the homeless years are really amazing. I mean, there's a paper written by a hospital historian about it, and it's a really interesting. You've got this fleet of warrior monks traveling around the Mediterranean, flirting with the local kings, just saying, "Hey, will you have us?" Nope. Okay, we'll move along. And they even took part in holy leagues while they were homeless. They still kept building ships.
Franco, when you're mentioning this, how about you talk about their flagship at the time?
Oh,
I believe you sent me a picture of it. Yeah.
Is that huge galleon?
Yeah, the Sant'Anna, the Saint Anne.
Whoa.
So basically, the Sant'Anna, they had two carracks, which the Santa Maria, which was a Muslim ship when they converted, and the Sant'Anna. Let me look up the details. Oh, the Sant'Anna. So, the Sant'Anna is interesting because it was their brand new jewel. It was built in 1522.
So
in
they
the same
were
year,
already
they
homeless,
lost Rhodes. Yeah. They lost Rhodes and said, "Oh, damn!" And then they said, "Okay, this is our home now." So they basically lived in a caravan for a few years, and when they found Malta, it was useless. So they let it rot in the Grand Harbor. But the Santa Maria was the other carrack. Maybe it's the one behind it. I don't know. Anyway, it was 160 feet long, 7 decks, 100 guns, accommodating 1,000 Marines and 500 sailors. So that's the Santa Maria. And the Sant'Anna was built in 1522. According to Bosio, the historian of the order, it was 280 feet long, capacity of 1,900 tons, 50 large guns, beautifully decorated. It had a chapel, an armory for 500 men, provisions for 6 months, flour mills, ovens, a dining room, quarters for the knights, an armored hull with lead, which was actually one of the first. So they were also experimenting with maritime fortifications, technology, because they were the avant-garde leaders in fortifications at the time, hands down, because they employed the leading engineers from Italy and all over Europe for their fortifications. And Italian engineers, who were the leaders in fortifications in the Rhodian period, they had carte blanche. They could do anything they want in Rhodes. So they had this huge fortification technology, and they seem to have been using it for the maritime technology as well. I mean, the Caracca Sant'Anna was like Elon Musk's toy of the time, you know.
So are they building these carracks? I mean, obviously they know that Suleiman is coming, right? Are they building these carracks in 1522 knowing that he's on his way?
Yes.
And yes. Are they built to provide a way to get out if you need to? Because it's hard to see. I mean, these are not commerce raider ships at all, right? I mean, they literally are like cruise ship size.
They're like huge gun platforms. They're like harbor destroyers.
But they seem defensive rather than offensive.
Yeah, because I mean, look, with a 50-gun ship, you're not going to go raiding because
no.
If you fired 25 guns, it's like saying, "Hey, I would like that thing to stop existing." You're not going to pick up anything out of that.
Exactly. No, these were like city destroyers.
They seem like getaway vehicles, really.
That's an interesting point, because the Caracca Sant'Anna was being built in the years prior to the siege. So it might actually have been something like that. They
don't know where they're going, right, at this point. Mm-hmm. So they may very well have thought, we're just going to have to live on our ships for a while.
That also makes sense.
That's a very interesting thought, yes.
Because it seems that they didn't really know what to do with it once they settled down. Which
right. No, once you get to Malta, you don't need a troop ship.
No, it was useless. And yeah, that's a very interesting theory, because that's actually what happened then. They roamed around with these two carracks and the galleys, etc. If they didn't have the two huge ships, they would have struggled, because all the archives and the jewels, the riches, basically,
the treasury.
The treasury and the archives and the hospital was on those two ships.
Yeah. Well, I think this kind of also goes back to the widely held belief among the general population that people in the past were stupid. And it's like, look, these folks have already had to relocate once. They have experience and they're not stupid. So why wouldn't they prepare for the coming deluge?
Oh, yes. That's I can live with that theory very well, because they had, if with their limited resources, the biggest asset they had was foresight. The hospitalers felt the need to adapt before it actually happened. That's why they survived.
Well, and the other thing is that, okay, maybe the commerce raiding becomes somewhat more difficult after the Ottomans take over the entire Eastern Mediterranean.
You'd be surprised, but no.
But they still had the income coming in from the commanderies. So
yes, that's what
so they have a secure cash flow.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Loosely collected is saying, I mean, it definitely seems like a ship that says, "Don't even think about screwing with us," which is absolutely the case.
Yes. I mean, a bunch of cannons. It was never. Well, I don't know if it was actually attacked. But yeah, it did well for itself, because I mean, it was never lost.
Because what are you going to do against an actual floating fortress, right? Like,
yes.
If they get close enough to hit you, they're going to hit you with knights. Like, what was your plan? Like, what's your plan? Have you guys ever seen that meme where it's like, drive the tank closer, I want to hit them with my sword?
Yes.
Like that that feels like the energy of that ship, which is kind of sweet.
And
I mean, traditionally, the way that galleys went after larger ships was they swarmed them, right? But you can swarm around a 7-deck ship all you want. You're not getting on board,
And if you get on board, you've got all the knights in it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, God help you if you get on board.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. I mean, no, please come.
Like they're not locked in here with you. You're locked in there with them.
That's right. That's the old
Roman
Roman
their own
joke.
galleys floating around as well as support.
Okay.
So,
but that's the old Roman joke of, Centurion, I've caught a Tartar. Well, bring him in. Well, he won't let me. You are the prisoner of your prisoner. if you board one of these
Okay.
carracks, you know.
So, Kyle, it's funny that you mentioned that 40k meme with the tank, because the whole thing with the fortress monastery with the warrior monks on it is very space marine energy.
I was actually going to say at the
Yes.
beginning of the video, but Franco was mid talk, and I did not want to cut it off. I forget what point you were making, but it was like a really good point. That was like because I was something I didn't know, but it always strikes me how much like the Iron Hands or the Imperial Fist the Hospitallers are,
Yeah, I mean,
because it's like I will build the big ass fortification and I will sit here for Jesus.
Yeah.
yeah, I was thinking more the Archangels because they've got their whole floating fortress monastery in space, which is a huge ship.
Oh, I always think of the Teutonic Knights as the Dark Angels, but because of the
Yeah.
black and white. I mean, obviously the Hospitallers had the black and white too, but the Teutonic Knights are just like, I am here to raid and murder and pillage. And what is a heretic is a very loosely defined term for them, even by Space Marine standards. They're like,
Fair enough.
you
Okay.
look kind of heretical.
Okay, so Franco, we have a question from Dungeon Matron. Did they suffer lead poisoning living on a ship lined with lead?
Oh, that's a good question.
I wouldn't know. I wouldn't think so. I mean, obviously the water supply would be in barrels, so
Yeah,
I
Well,
don't know.
and actually, that's
I mean,
a
lead
good
is
question. I
outside.
mean,
So
you would think they would be in barrels, but in a ship of that size, and if I remember correct, this is obviously a little bit later,
Mhm.
but there were a couple of Spanish ships in the Spanish Armada that actually had lead cisterns to carry water.
ooh,
Ooh. Okay.
Me too.
You know, so I suppose it's possible. These ships, I think, are probably big enough to do that. I don't know that they did it, but you know, if
I
you're going
wouldn't
to
know
be,
how.
yeah, if you're going to be, if you're preparing to live on them for an extended period of time, I don't know. Maybe that's a reasonable precaution. I don't
Yeah.
know.
I wouldn't know about the lead poisoning. I mean, but then again, back then, hey, mercury poisoning, lead poisoning, what the hell? I mean,
Yeah.
you're gonna die at 50
You wouldn't
anyway.
live long enough to die from the lead poisoning.
So, but yeah, I wouldn't know really. The lead was obviously probably in between hulls. So
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
It's interesting though, because I know that recently they did some ice core studies that showed that just Roman, not, I mean, everybody talks about the lead that was in pipes in Rome, right?
oh yeah,
But they did some ice cores in Greenland that showed that there was enough metalworking industry in the Roman Empire that the amount of metal residue in the air that would then get into food, etc., was enough to lower the average IQ of a Roman citizen by 1 to 2 points.
Just the stuff
oh
in the air.
wow,
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry?
Just the stuff in the
Wow.
environment.
Yeah,
Okay.
just because there was that much organized, large-scale metalworking going on.
That's
wow.
insane.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
So
I mean, the lead pipe thing makes perfect sense, right? But
Yeah.
but yeah, you talk about pollution doing things. That
yeah,
Yeah. That's,
Yeah.
and they didn't know
interesting.
so
about
exposure
that.
to lead and stuff like that, not good.
Mhm.
But it's okay, guys. Man can't actually affect real climate change. Don't worry.
No.
No,
No,
Totally.
that's a myth. That's fake. That's fake. Fake news. We don't need. It's fine.
Eh.
We don't
So
need that.
so Franco, when they were like floating around, did they? I mean, where did they go? What was what was their track like?
Well, actually, oh damn it! I should have sent you the map. There is a map by Professor Malia Melanes, who's the professor who wrote about this
Let me
homeless
see if I
years.
can find it.
Yeah, basically Western Mediterranean. Basically, they went around Italy and France. So they sort of steered a bit away from the Eastern because it was hot.
Yeah. Why?
hot
Well,
place.
and not only that, but the Turks are still next door. So
Yeah. So obviously they went to Civitavecchia, Nice, and those areas. And basically it was just floating from port to port. Don't forget, they also had lots of land property.
Right.
So they had a hospital in Nice, I think. Well, wherever you have a priory, which is basically, in the pyramid of things, you have the Lang, which is the Lang of Italy, for example. Then you have the priories, which is the priory of Venice, the priory of Genoa, the priory of Florence, etc. And then you have all the little commanderies. So wherever there's a priory, imagine the priory in Nice or the priory in Civitavecchia, they would have a hospital. And that's a huge diplomatic tool. I think from this paper I read, one of the places they went, the agreement with the local, I think it was Nice, I'm not sure though, was to build a hospital to offer free medical care. And yeah, they were welcomed, obviously, So yeah, they weren't just floating around an open sea. It would more be like periods of stays in different ports.
Because it seems like logistically, you'd have to. I mean, you have resources. So if you're going to go to, let's say, Venice, if you're going to take your little fleet up to Venice, you can send out letters to all the other priories and say, we're going to go to Venice, send all these supplies
exactly
there, right? And we'll refuel. Not only that, but if you have people getting sick on the ships, you've got your own hospitals.
You got your hospital. That's exactly how it happened. And they survived, they flourished.
Even the ships are hospitals. Some of the larger ships, I mean.
One time they had the infirmary. But the three cities are Civitavecchia, Viterbo, and Nice.
So did they have a presence on Malta at all? Did they have a priory on Malta?
No.
Or no, nothing.
No, once they got forced out, they were gone.
It was they thought it would have been useless to them.
Do you think maybe they hoped Charles V gave them Ibiza or something like that?
Oh, damn it.
As opposed to,
they wanted
Malta's nice and all, but could we have Ibiza or Mallorca?
There was another place which they wanted, and you're saying it as a joke, but I think it was something similar.
I know this is off on a tangent, but like knowing what Ibiza is like now, can you imagine like hospitaller nightclubs? Like, come on, dude.
You would die. You go out on the dance floor in a nightclub there in full armor, right?
I mean, these were young single men, so
it's the best club to die at, though. They already have the hospitals.
That's true.
The medical tent at the hospitaller raves goes crazy. We've got it. It's fine.
I mean, you're saying it as a joke.
Vertical integration at its finest, guys.
I mean, you're saying it as a joke, but seriously, those guys partied hard.
Oh, I know.
Oh, yeah.
Karl, I know So, Karl, you know how we're doing the little things that make fantasy worlds feel real? There's a whole section on partying for that video, buddy. People like to rage. Like, I
would have thought.
It's not like magically humans stopped liking beer, food, and sex at any point in history. Like, come on, guys.
Yes. It's one of your previous guests would know a thing or so about that. Professor Manuel Bottigieg in his book, Masculinity and Violence and Sex and etc. Somewhere there.
So how did they? So I mean, if they're going to Civitavecchia and Viterbo and Nice. Well, let's see. I'm just thinking because I always, you have to sort of reorient yourself and go, wait, Charles V ruled a lot of Italy too.
Yep.
Yes.
So
as you do.
Yeah. So I mean, they're asking, I presume, for this entire decade that they're homeless, right? So what is it that sort of, does Charles V give them Malta just to get them off his back, or does he feel bad about the fact that his army sacked Rome, or something like that?
No. Well, actually, I think it's in this story is in Brodel, the historian, famous historian Brodel. It's in one of his sections. Oh God, it's that massive book.
Yeah.
Volume 1. There's Volume 2, Anyway.
Yeah, well, the funny thing about Braudel, of course, is that he's known as being an author of the longue durée, but that's not just his historical school; it's also how long his books are.
But and this guy is another favorite, David Abulafia, the Great Sea.
And then that's the
they explain what was happening in the Mediterranean at the time where they were the knights were homeless, and you could see the picture of the Spanish Empire struggling to become as powerful as the Ottoman Empire. Obviously, they couldn't do it in the Eastern Mediterranean, so I think David Abulafia has the theory where the West and the East Mediterranean was split into. The West was Spain and the East was Ottoman. So giving Malta to the Knights, which is geographically in the middle, was an ace move to do by the Emperor, Emperor Charles V. The Grand Master at the time, L'Isle d'Adam, was probably one of the best diplomats as a Grand Master, because he kept friends with everyone in the European states, and obviously he was homeless. He needed a place to stay, and they were also again threatened like the Templars were in the 1300s with their raison d'être. They were homeless, etc. So they were risking it. The Knights, basically, to cut it short, sold the fact that they are the only bunch of crazy people who are still willing to crusade against Islam. And if you put us somewhere strategic, we'll do it for you happily. Just give us a port. And that's what.
So basically, there was a gap in the defenses of the Spanish holdings, and
the Spanish Empire struggled in the Barbary states. They couldn't.
So you can just stick them right in, and not only that, but they support themselves.
Yeah.
So you mean to say that they found an economic market, a position in the market that was economically viable and filled that market, like how a certain franchise would fill a marketplace for cheap food quickly, and also red and yellow clowns. Intriguing.
Exactly. The Venetians looked at them as clowns anyway, so come on, guys.
Yeah, see? And this is why you didn't get the title, Franco. Franco understood the mission statement from the jump. I do want to say, though, like, one of my favorite things about, and this is not necessarily a tangent, but like one of my favorite things about the Hospitallers in general, and I think it dovetails nicely with what we're discussing here, is their willingness to cooperate with pretty much just anybody else. Because like one of the things that pops up in my studies of the early Crusades was that there's a really interesting sort of cross cultural quilt in the Levant that exists, like of a cycle of cooperation between like entrenched Christian merchants who are like outsiders but bringing a lot of capital, and established Muslim and Islamic cultures who are already there and have like the advantage in terms of both the terrain and their understanding of it, but are hostile, and then Jewish intermediaries who kind of go in between those people. But like, it's interesting, like in the reading, the knightly orders that seem to and don't want to really engage with that don't do well, and the Hospitallers are like, oh yeah, like they just kind of insert themselves, and I think it is the Hospitals too, but the kind of like the way that you're talking about them cooperating with different European monarchs seems very similar to the way that they were willing to cooperate with different like tribal and smaller cultural powers within that region. So it feels like the order has already gotten a ton of practice before any of that even happens.
Oh yes. They learned a lot from the Holy Land, and they kept systems they started in the Holy Land, and they learned a lot from Cyprus and Rhodes, which was the Navy, and they kept that system. And basically in Malta, it was the Golden Age, where they applied everything they learned from those two eras. And the homeless era, which was like the diplomacy course, the diplomacy crash course.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting parallel that isn't actually parallel. The whole idea, I mean, some of this I know is anti-Templar propaganda, but the idea that they were so successful that they had become arrogant and, you can't do without us, that was their attitude, and they paid for it ultimately. But the Hospitallers I don't remember a single instance when somebody said, Oh, the Hospitallers, those guys, they're far too arrogant. They're far too full of themselves.
Yeah.
And it maybe some of that is them learning from what happened to the Templars, although they've been in order for a couple of hundred years by the time the Templars go under.
Very cool.
But they seem to realize that, look, if we want to fulfill our mission,
Mhm.
Yeah.
we can't go around pissing off people all over
Exactly.
the place. Because
Exactly.
ultimately, we're dependent on people coming from Europe to
Mhm.
join our forges, revenue from Europe that support us. We can't afford to do any of the. We can't afford to have the reputation that the Templars have.
Exactly.
Well,
And in Malta, it's reversed, because then suddenly they're the shield of Europe.
Right.
That was the popular culture at the time. I mean, the knights. There's one of the reading lists is a German tourist who visits Malta in the 1500s, and that's how it was described: the shield of Europe. Because after the Great Siege, 1565, the fear of the Ottoman Empire invading Italy and etc. And these hospitallers in Malta are resisting them. So that basically solidified their existence for 200 years, because they were heroes. They were like the heroes of Europe. So
They
Well,
were,
and
but they also
not to burst the Hospitaller balloon, but they really benefit from, even though they sent some ships, I thought they really so they're there in 1565, and the press is sort of like, oh, look, they're there, they're going to be, we have all this experience, this is going to be great. And then they really benefit, it seems to me, from the Battle of Lepanto, which is not just a Hospitaller fleet.
no,
It's all sorts of people. It's
Yeah.
Spanish, it's Italian, it's a variety of things.
Yeah. Only 3 ships were hospitallers.
Yeah, I mean, and so the Hospitallers, but they're still on the front lines. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But they do benefit from the fact that there is this tremendous defeat of the Ottoman forces. And so what it does is it gives them time, because they've only been on Malta for what, 6 years, 5 years, 6 years at that point. Valletta doesn't look like it does today.
no.
Oh no. Okay.
Lepanto was way more than
71.
6 years. Yeah.
71, yeah.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
arrived
so-
in the 30s. Yeah, a couple of decades, but not much.
Yeah.
They didn't have a strong.
So
foothold.
it gives them time to develop.
Oh yes,
Mhm.
yes.
That's the thing, is it buys
Yes.
them breathing room.
Yes.
I also want to point out too that like a lot of these orders don't cooperate, and that seems to be one, other than the adaptability thing, it's the cooperation that seems to be the biggest strength of the Hospitallers as an order, right? Whether they're building the hospitals, because let's be real here, like medical treatment being what it is in the Middle Ages, you don't want to piss off a good doctor.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? You have no idea when you're going to need you have no idea when you're going to need one.
Exactly.
And the fact that they're willing to work with Muslims, they're willing to work with the Jews, they're willing to work with pretty much damn near anybody.
Yeah.
People always sleep on, like, people like to pretend that, like, it's this sort of hyper masculine, like, we are the alpha, go alone, fight, we lead, like, it's good old jolly cooperation that keeps the Hospitallers alive for this long.
Exactly. Just 1 second. I just remembered something else. Oh damn it! Keep talking.
Okay.
No, it's okay. My favorite sentence in the world is when a historian says, "I just remembered something else," because it's going to be heat.
Okay. So
It's like,
Well, I was just going to say that you have a choice if you're an insular nation, right? You either become cosmopolitan
mhm.
or you become isolationist. You can be Japan or you can be Malta.
Okay, just to add on to what Kyle said about cooperation.
Yeah.
Once they got to
You
Malta,
have that choice.
once they got to Malta, they found someone else to cooperate with. A very large pre-existing corsair industry.
Oh yes. And exactly, the corsairing industry in Malta existed before they arrived.
So they have a ready-made model.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Malta was a backwater to a certain extent, but because if you read the medieval history of Malta, there were quite a lot of stuff happening. There's like the Battle of Malta I, which was between Rome and Carthage, and the Battle of Malta II, which was between the Aragonese and the Angevins, which it wasn't about Malta, it was about the grandest the biggest
It just happened in the area.
geopolitical. It just happened in Malta because of the geopolitical.
Well, and at some point,
importance.
the Norman kings of Sicily take it over.
Yeah,
as
the
well.
Norman occupation in the 1000s. So yeah, the Maltese population was very small, and there's a perfect example of Fernand Brauddel's example of the countryside, people in the mountains being pure and closed-minded, and the people on the harbor being corrupt and open to everything. And in Malta, it was exactly that. There was the capital city, which was inland in Mdina, which is an Arabic word, Medina. And that's where the nobility lived and the bishop lived. And then you had Birgu, which was where Valletta is today, on the other side of the harbor, which is where the pirates lived.
It's so funny. That's
and you
literally
had
how.
a Spanish fortress just protecting the tip, which now is Fort St. Angelo. Sorry.
No. It's okay. I laugh because again, it's like it's we're going back to humans getting human of like, yes, those wealthy coastal elites, they're so effete and knowledgeable but corrupt. The simple country folk with their pure heart. It couldn't be that there's any complexity there for either group at all.
Exactly. So that's when the knights arrived in Malta. You could see the attitude of the order of the Hospitallers. When they arrived in Malta, they did not want to piss off the local nobility. But they did not have to do that because they were hugely powerful compared to these little community of insular nobles. But they still said, okay, you guys stay up in your little citadel, but leave the harbor to us. The harbor is ours. They made them useless politically, but they let them keep their city. That was the attitude of the Hospitallers. They weren't like arrogant and say, hey, Mdina's ours, go away. Or, they sort of used diplomacy even where they did not really have to. But it actually paid because in the Great Siege 20 years later, the Maltese the local population, they did not surrender to the Ottomans. They just stuck with it with the Hospitallers, basically. Mm-hmm. So diplomacy down to the grassroots.
Yeah, they seem to have been very good about making cost-effective decisions.
Yep.
It's like we could make sure that we dominate the entire island, overtly, but it's not worth it. That's not that's not our mission. Having Malta is a means to an end.
Yes.
It's not an end in itself.
And speaking of an end to itself, I sadly have to depart.
I
know. Franco, I look forward to seeing you again. Karl, thank you for having me.
Likewise.
Tom,
pleasure as always.
Pleasure as always.
Enrico,
please get Franco back on here because this was a blast and a half. I can see why. So before I leave, I have to share this. Franco, every time I come on here and Karl's like, "Oh, I have a friend," I'm like, immediately like, I'm gonna love this person because like every time I haven't been proven wrong. So I look forward to we all get to chat about Knights again. I do think we should do like a general Knights chat as well.
Ooh.
We can call it a night in with Karl Makes Stuff, and we can spell it with a pun.
Yeah.
Yeah, could be good. All right, goodbye, everybody.
Okay, thanks for joining us. Bye. Okay, unfortunately, he did warn me that he had to leave a bit earlier.
What I just realized, Karl, is we didn't speak much about the Navy.
We did not speak much about the Navy, in fact. Yeah, maybe we should
the corsairing and the
I was.
Well, I think that's the thing is it does change over time, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, like it evolves a lot. So, Franco, you'd like to walk us through the Navy?
Oh, we still have time for it.
I mean,
I'm good.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, how to summarize it? what did Malta have that the knights needed? Malta only had one thing good. The rest was all bad. The only good thing Malta had was the harbor. Basically,
Yeah,
there's a report written by some knights who came to Malta, and it was quite negative. And they said, "Oh, come on, this is not a place we should live in." Rhodes was beautiful; it had forests. The population were cultured. I mean, we're like coming to this backwater full of farmers who look like Arabs. That's their word. So they weren't happy with Malta. There was no fresh water, but it had two massive harbors, and yeah, basically they used it to their advantage because of the geographical location. And they had the corsairs, not pirates, corsairs.
they had vessels.
So basically they just blew it up tenfold. The corsairing industry, I mean. To become a knight, you had to do the caravan, which was a word coming from the Holy Land, which was 6 months of service on a galley. And you had to do that 4 times, I think. So you had to do 2 years of galley service as a knight, and then you have enough seniority for a commander or to become a captain of a galley or whatever. But apart from that, so obviously the knights had this system of the caravan, so they had to have ships, galleys, to go out on a corso, which is like when you go out a Viking. It's the same thing. Vikings, Viking, corsairs, corso. But then they had the private enterprises, which said, "Hey, we've been here. We want to keep doing what we've been doing." So they just made a system of tax where if you fly under the flag of the order, you have the diplomatic muscle of the order, and you can attack any Muslim shipping you want, etc., as long as you give a huge percentage to the order.
So it's sort of like privateering.
Privateering.
It is exactly privateering.
Privateering. It's exactly the same. Corsairing, Mediterranean, privateering, I guess, just to put it loosely.
Everywhere else.
Exactly. That's privateering. That's it.
Uh-huh.
It became complicated during the time of the Enlightenment, end of the 17th century and in the 18th, because obviously France and Venice and the Ottoman Empire weren't such huge enemies anymore, politically. And obviously there was the whole of the Enlightenment happening about, what the hell, what is this crusading? It's disrupting commerce and the modern era. But they still kept it up because the Barbary states didn't give a damn about the Enlightenment. They just kept their corsairing activities because you couldn't call them pirates. These were states. But they thrived on their own corsairing activity and European shipping.
Well, to be fair, the US did consider them pirates enough to build a navy to go keep them quiet.
Oh, well, yeah. Yes. So yeah, the hospitals in the 18th century, to cut it loosely, kept existing for another 100 years because they became a police service. They sort of corsairs attacking other corsairs, and they were a buffer.
But they also offered stuff like protection service, like escorting ships and stuff like that. Yeah.
I mean, we've been doing this for 400 years. You can rely on us to protect your ambassador, your prince, or your merchant ships. And they also kept the balance because they attacked Muslim shipping. They kept the balance of the Barbary states corsairing, basically. If one went missing, the other one would obviously dominate.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird ecosystem.
This may sound a little strange, and maybe it's a reach. So they're booted out of Malta in 1798. That's shortly thereafter is when the Barbary states really become such a problem that almost every European and United States power are like, holy crap, they're just going nuts. We got to send a fleet over.
Exactly.
So, I mean, do you think that it really is because that sort of crucial we're Johnny on the spot kind of situation that the Hospitallers had, that has been removed?
I think so.
You know?
I think so, because they were so successful. They had two fleets. They had the galley fleet, which was the essentially the corsaring fleet, because a galley
Mhm.
is designed to capture ships,
Mhm.
board them and etc. And then they had the sailing ship, the sailing ship fleet, the ships of the line, which lasted 91 years and never lost. It was like a very successful fleet. It also served as a college for other mariners from the states of Europe, by the way, because of its organization. And the ships of the line didn't really capture other ships; they destroyed them, really, because you have cannons.
Mhm.
So
Right.
they were like the policing part, which started in 1701. So it's perfect timing. Then Napoleon happened. The Napoleonic Wars obviously disrupted a bit things, and then it's what you described. It's like, oh, okay, we have this problem in North Africa now. The balance was lost, and then a reaction was needed.
It's kind of ironic because, of course, in the Napoleonic Wars, the number of warships in the Mediterranean increased tremendously, but at the same
Yes.
time,
Yes.
they're not looking at North Africa. They're
Exactly, yeah.
looking at each other, right?
No. Exactly. Maybe Egypt.
Yeah, before the Battle of the Nile, it isn't as if Nelson is going, I'm going to go in and take a look at Algiers. He's no, I've got to find the French fleet. So for that period of time, everybody's attention is turned away.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And the Barbary states doing what they did.
So the Barbary states have this resurgence, and wait, now, post Napoleonic, in the post Napoleonic period, suddenly you're kind of like, oh, we forgot about this thing that actually was a problem for hundreds of years.
Exactly. Which wasn't a problem in the eyes of the European states, because it was sort of buffered by the. But it's amazing because, okay, this might be a theoretical thing. It is a theoretical thing, because obviously studying history, you're putting theories on what happened, because the navy of the Hospitallers was tiny, but then it had the corsairs helping, and that's the books by Liam Gauci about all these private corsairs, the private Christian corsairs, and their businesses. So if you add that to the Hospitaller navy, then you have quite a good presence. And there wasn't only the Malta corsairs; there was, other European states.
And I guess the other thing is that, and we shouldn't forget, it isn't as if the European powers were doing nothing about it.
Yeah.
There was also, various people. I mean, the English did send a fleet in the 17th century to try to clear it out a bit. So it was really all of these different groups cooperating, as we've said, to sort of keep the Barbary corsairs in check. But once the knights are no longer there and the European fleets are looking elsewhere for their main focus,
exactly,
that balance, the thing that did keep them in check, is just totally gone.
It's ironic that when did the British Empire ban corsairing in 18 something? It's ironic that they banned it, because obviously now there wasn't a European power doing it anymore. So hey, this is illegal.
Yeah. Well, so it was a successful policy. That's what the administration.
I can't remember when it was banned, but it was in the early 1800s anyway. And obviously the British Empire were in Malta, and now it was against their interests. So hey, okay, stop.
Right.
So, Franco,
I can't remember the date.
apart from corsairing, and I believe you mentioned that the Hospitallers also hired out their fleet to for military engagements. I mean, not hired out. I mean, they joined expeditions and so on. We've already mentioned Lepanto, but I believe there was something about Sweden, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh no, that so obviously the Hospitallers' playground was definitely the Mediterranean, and they took part in practically any Holy League or any European alliance against Islamic states, obviously. But because the Navy, well, not just the Navy, because the Hospitallers themselves, the military skills were so sought after, European states constantly asked for help in the form of either individual leaders, like Hospitaller captains, like Don Juan's flagship was captained by a Knight of Malta, for example, in Lepanto. And there were many other European battles where they said, "Oh, this super captain in Malta, we need him. He's a citizen of France," and they used to go and offer service. But then there was the professional advice kind of thing, professional consultancy.
I was going to say, like a security consulting firm.
Yeah.
There was one in Russia, which was also the lover of the Empress, if I'm not mistaken.
Catherine?
I think.
That covers a lot of ground. So
yeah, that's a big story to say.
It does not narrow it down much.
I'm sure one of the Knights of Malta who went to Russia as a consultant, and I'm not sure if it's artillery. Anyway, he became a lover of the Empress, etc. There was one story of a very obscure story of knights in Japan, and then there was a Japanese visit. The prince of the emperor visited Rome as a diplomatic,
like kind of like exchange study kind of thing, right?
Exchange. I think, I'm not sure about this. I think that was also an artillery to sort of teach Japanese military artillery work. This was in the 17th century or 18th century. One of them was Sweden. The wars between Sweden and Russia, the Baltic Sea, which is basically another closed sea, and even the Russians had galleys. Basically, they saw the use of galleys in the 18th century in the Baltic Sea in these wars. And who are the experts in galley fighting for 400 or 500 years? The Hospitallers down in the Med. So they were invited over to, as a consultants to the Kingdom of Sweden. As an exchange, most of the cannons were made in Sweden for the Hospitaller Navy.
I was going to say, if you take a look at if you think about rowing a galley through the islands around Stockholm versus going through the Aegean, it all looks pretty much the same, except that it's pine forest versus, cypress and olive.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the maneuverability was obviously the edge.
I was thinking we're talking about galleys, but it might be nice to show one in a second. But first, there's a really good question from Dungeon Matron. Any Hospitaller versus Hospitaller situations?
Well, we were talking about Romegas.
I mean, even on a smaller scale, these cases where the order was split were very rare, and that is one of them. But these guys fought each other all the time. You couldn't leave two of them in the room alone.
It's a professional military organization. Yeah. If they don't go out in the woods and beat the crap out of each other every once in a while, that would be weird.
There's a particular story. It's in my book, actually. After the Great Siege, so 1565, you've got all these young knights with PTSD, and they're being happy and drinking in Birgu, not in Valletta. It wasn't built yet. I can't remember how it started, but there was a fight between. I try and remember. Well, it's not that important if I get the countries wrong, but anyway, one Lang against the others. I think it was Italian knights had a fight with Spanish knights, and in the same town, and the fist fight sort of grew into a gunfight, and then sort of Grandmaster de Valette thought he should step in when it became a cannon fight in the streets of Virgo. And he
It's-
said, "Okay, boys, come on, stop."
Okay, that's actually it sounds funny, but that's actually at least the second time that had happened. Because
Oh yeah. That's just one episode.
I
But
believe
that is so. There's two things about that I think are really interesting. One is that, as you said, it's right after the siege. So if some of these guys are volunteers that came for the siege, you're literally talking about the 18 and 19-year-olds that are totally fired up even before they get there.
Yeah.
So it's, they may be actually seasoned warriors, but I mean, they're going to be younger, more out of control, right?
Mostly.
The
And
other
there's
thing
no war
is,
fight.
yeah, they're ready to go at the drop of a hat. The other thing is, and this is so medieval, of the two Langs fighting it out, because that occurs in every university. That
Yes.
Yes. And basically it's no different between like two fraternities fighting it out.
Yes.
This is just young men who have drunk a little too much, going a little nuts.
And that's part of the research in my book about the use of swords, etc. That's how they got the weapon laws. That okay, in the convent, by the way, the convent was the city. So first the convent was the city of Vittoriosa, Birgu, and then the convent was the city of Valletta. So in the convent, no weapons were allowed. You were only allowed to carry your sword because that's a status symbol, full stop. So they had to hand in their guns. That was also to control violence in the city of all these young frat wars. And this was basically 8 langs, 8 fraternities, 8 different languages, 8 nationalities.
Same thing happened in the West, in the United States. You had, if you were a cowboy, you came into town, you had to check your guns with the sheriff.
Oh yes, of course, exactly. The same balance for violence. Yeah, exactly. But what's very intriguing to me, and I discuss it in the book, is how the hell did this organization not implode? You've got wars in Europe. I mean, your cousin is killing your colleague's brother in Europe, and you're fighting shoulder to shoulder on a galley against Islam. Obviously, the common factor was the Crusades and the ethos of the Hospitaller Order, etc. But you're still a Frenchman if you're a Frenchman. You're still an Italian if you're an Italian. And the order devised this system of healthy competition between these fraternities, these langs. So they made them compete with each other positively rather than negatively. So they made regular, help me out, Karl, tournaments.
Tournaments between each other.
Regular tournaments, and and they used to do that in every aspect. Yeah, obviously.
That was important.
I mean,
at American universities, after all, that's the origin of intramural sports.
Oh,
is it? So sports
like,
between
indoor squash
teams,
and stuff like that.
Yeah, so different fraternities would field sports teams.
Oh, yes.
And these weren't the school teams, but it was a way of blowing off steam originally.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it's like Kyle likes to say, humans gonna human.
Yes. Humans are, and young men are a specific type of human.
Yep.
So yeah, but I agree that is interesting because it does suggest, first of all, a certain amount of management and recognition of the issue.
Yes.
Yeah, totally.
Yes.
Which is true in any multinational force.
Yes. You remind. Oh, sorry. Go on.
No, I was just gonna say, and it also it means that they saw an issue, they developed a policy to deal with it, and I think I'm probably that doesn't necessarily surprise me because I think, as I said, any multinational group has this issue. What's surprising to me is that apparently it worked.
Oh yeah, successfully.
Yeah, that's what's amazing.
You remind me of
because you would
something
think it would go right into the Capulets versus the Montagues at the drop of a hat.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. What was different, which was only present in my mind in the shogunate in Japan was the absolute obedience, vow of obedience. And that was strengthened by a very strong religious monastic system. You only have to you have to see it to feel it, to see it, and not just read about it. The monastic orders, the religious orders, even of today, I mean, the head of the monastery is the father. It's literally the father, not the priest. It's like the father figure. And the grandmaster had a very heavy paternalistic presence. In
But,
fact, most
Franco, question. I mean, like, they didn't really pay much attention to the other two vows. Why did they particularly stick to this one?
well, because it was more important.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, celibacy. Okay, that's just like small print. We need to do it because it's a religious order. Also, the celibacy, so you don't get married and don't get legal heirs.
Legal attachment.
That's the
Right.
most important.
Right.
So
That's
standard.
important. Yeah.
But obedience is, if they didn't have that, they would have probably imploded.
Totally imploded.
And it's amazing how the sorry, I was going to try and remember the punishment system was basically just a slap on the hand most of the time. The grandmaster just says, "You've been a bad boy. Go and sweat it out either for 40 days or for 7 days in the cell," which was called the quarantena or the settima. Okay, if you kill or you do something really bad or you kill a brother, you get defrocked, you get kicked out. But most of it was just a paternalistic say, okay, you've been bad, we're going to humiliate you in front of everyone, you're going to lose your honor, but you cannot take it back because I'm your father, I'm your boss.
You cannot take revenge,
you just have
kind
to
of
say
thing.
sorry, and then you have to sort of move on.
And the other thing is that you don't want to lose people. You have a limited pool
Yeah, exactly.
of manpower.
Just say sorry and move on. Basically, different than the shogunate, the samurai would kill himself to get
right.
These didn't.
Well, the other thing that, I mean, again, this is sort of the terms that we use now, but they meant different things then. We're saying, oh, the French lang and the Italian lang. Since there's fundamentally no France per se in a lot of ways, and certainly no Italian, Italy, it's just as possible for a knight from, I don't know, Naples to get into it with a knight from Milan.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
Or, I mean, because in a lot of places, after all, the sort of there were multiple French langues, right? There was an Occitan, there was a northern French one, and all of that. So when we say the French lang or the Italian lang, it's not a monolithic block.
No, they weren't countries, they were just languages.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
That's why
and some of those don't even work because, as somebody from southern Italy doesn't necessarily communicate real well with someone from northern Italy, and same in France.
It was very loose because even like the Polish knights had to join through the language of Germany.
Pretty again, very common. It's really set up the same way it is in the universities.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah, it's the same like Scottish knights. Even though Scotland was an independent nation, they were automatically Scottish students were automatically put into the English lang, which they were not happy about.
Okay, yeah, exactly. You just have to make do with what's close.
Yeah, it's an administrative thing only.
Yeah.
So that led to a lot of internal dissension.
So talking about how they existed and how they managed to exist, going back to the naval aspect, basically the term I love is what was generally called the Reconquista of the sea. So you have the Spanish Reconquista, where getting back the Iberian Peninsula from Islam. So the knights, their raison d'etre was the getting back the Mediterranean, basically. And after Lepanto, that was exactly that was like beautiful for them. It fell on their lap perfectly, because Europe said, hey, we're on a winning streak, we want the Mediterranean back, we want the trade routes safer, etc., etc. And they rode on it by offering their services.
But as you mentioned, Lepanto was somewhat more valuable as a symbol rather than as a concrete military victory.
Yes. For the Ottoman Empire, they rebuilt their in 20 years. They rebuilt
I think it was even quicker than that. Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, I think that's something, because we get these maps and they show the Mediterranean or they show the Eastern Mediterranean, and you really don't get an idea of how many resources the Ottomans could pull
Exactly.
I mean, they had an empire.
Yeah. I mean,
and they had a huge landmass.
Exactly.
Huge population.
And they're not short of anything. People, grain fields, forests, they're not short.
Exactly. They could whip up a fleet in a few years. That's what they did.
Yeah. And also part of it is that because it was an empire, you could pull, and they did pull, ship workers from Egypt to go build stuff in the Levant or even in Greece. So
yes.
They had a lot of options that smaller polities did not have.
Exactly. And even the Habsburg Empire wasn't like that. It didn't have that resource power. It was huge as well.
It was
but
huge,
then the Habsburg Empire looked west as well then. So that was a bit, they looked.
Well, I mean, but the Ottomans are looking towards Persia as well. I mean, it's not easy for either of them. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the Habsburgs are, oh, good, we have a forest in, I don't know, Carinthia. Okay, but now you have to negotiate with, with the Herzog of Carinthia, whereas the Suleiman could just go make it so.
Exactly.
The organization is very different.
Yeah, absolutely. So.
Okay, so let's jump back to the fleet and talk about galleys. And let's actually show a picture of a galley, because otherwise it's going to be very confusing. There we go.
Yep, that's it. So essentially, you would think it's a classical era ship, but it was basically from the 1300s up to the late 1700s. This is like a 17th century galley. It has the cannons on the front. It has one big cannon and two. Usually it would be five. So it would have the two smaller ones, and then it would have bow thrusters. And then above the cannons, you would have a fighting platform, so to speak. Well, that's what it is.
Is it this one here?
Yes.
All right.
I mean, it's obviously one version. Maybe if you whip up another picture, there might be other bigger fighting platforms, but that's the idea. You've got the rowers on the sides, which were either slaves, convicts, or volunteers. The volunteers would be basically broke people who owed money, and they made the contract to row on the galley until they pay their dues, basically. And it was obviously powered by oars, but only when in action. When it's sailing, when it's traveling, it used the lateen sail. The big problem of the galley, it's open. There's a small area with cabins for the captain and his officers, but as you can see, there's not much space. So the space was very, very, very small. And because it was so small, they had a very, very, very good organized system to not to keep this tiny ship effective. Oh, yeah, that's a galley in winter, for example.
With the covers,
so they just put a canopy over people. And the cabins were at the back. And you have Marines on the front, actually, on the fighting platform.
I see. It looks incredibly crowded inside.
It was terribly. It was always described, even when you have these people on the Grand Tour who hitched a ride on a galley, for example, from Italy to Malta, they would describe it as appallingly crowded. The slaves basically slept where they worked.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you got a cute picture of Maltese sailors there.
The universe.
Those are. One of them is a marine on the sailing ships, though. Not. No, one of them is on the galleys. Actually, I think there's one that's barefoot. Those are marines, basically Maltese marines.
So generally speaking, did the galleys cruise, or did they simply sort of find a convenient cove or something and sort of wait it out, on a trade route?
A bit of both, actually. They went on a corso, on a cruise, basically,
Right.
And they would know where to go. They
Right.
would know where the trading. It was quite random, and on the reading list I posted, some of the stories are like, wow, Pirates of the Caribbean, that's amateur compared to a couple of Jack Sparrows there, which are like really realistic. And it was quite random. They just cruise around. If it's bad weather, they stop in a port. If they're short of water, they just stop in another port and get water. If they see a ship, they just
go for it.
If they see two corsair ships and you're only one galley, you just run away. It was that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was crazy. I mean, some of these books I recommend reading are like amazing stories. I don't know how they're not movies. And I can see how low in the water they were. In fact, the corso could only happen in summer, because obviously when it's bad weather, the galleys, no.
They don't not going to happen.
And I guess the other thing is that the Spanish and the French both also maintained galley squadrons.
Oh yeah,
every major port had a galley squadron that was full of convicts, basically.
This is the flagship galley of this is the flagship galley of Grandmaster Pinto, who was actually self-proclaimed Prince of Malta. So he was not just a Grandmaster; he was also a prince. He said, "Okay, we've been around for enough. I'm a prince now."
Okay.
He's got the flagship here, and you got the Marines in the front, and that's like an 18th century galley now. You can see how it's forming into, 18th century.
Franco, how's the method of fighting with these ships? I mean, because they do have different cannons, but I believe you mentioned something like about turning it into a land battle.
No, that basically the Battle of Lepanto is described by historians as a infantry battle on sea. I mean, that's basically how it was. The galley is basically used to. The maneuverability is amazing because it could turn very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
It just charges a ship and fires cannons at it from the front, not from the sides, because you've got rowers on the sides.
Yep.
And then basically, because it's so narrow, the other ship has difficulty firing at it, because it's not like Master and Commander, two huge sailing ships going side by side and shooting at each other. You got a little galley coming at you like that,
and it presents a very small target. Yeah,
very like fencing card. Yeah. Small target, and basically then it's on you, and it rams the ship sometimes, like the classical
like a trireme.
Yeah.
And
the thing that I don't understand is the thing that I don't understand, I guess, just logistically speaking, is so like at Lepanto. I mean, I've read the accounts of the battle, and it does actually read very much like a classical battle.
Yes.
In that the ships are lashing themselves to each other to form essentially a gigantic fighting platform.
Exactly.
How do you do that with all the oars there?
Oh, with extreme difficulty.
I was going to say, I mean, because it's like, oh well, you just pull the oars in, and I'm like, no, there's not enough room to do that.
Like in fencing or like in other military engagements, giving your flank is not good.
Right.
So as a galley, you give the front. And you just literally board from the front.
So there's a tactical issue there, isn't there? Because you've got all your Marines, but first of all, they're grouped there, so one shot takes them out. But secondly, if you ram and board, or even if you don't ram and you just get the beak of your galley there,
you just get
all the defenders can group right there.
Yeah.
Yes. Obviously, got the musketeers and the firepower, etc. But it's very hard to imagine because it's really dangerous.
Yeah.
I can't imagine how they did it and survived.
And again, I guess the idea that you really, it's not, again, you said master and commander, you don't want two ships of the line. It's not like that. It's not one-on-one. What you want is a bunch of galleys all coming in.
Yes,
Well, yeah.
actually, that's one point. That's one point. I mean, that's how Romegas was so successful, being described as the Wolf of the Sea, and that's how the Corso was made in the Navy of the Order of St. John. They didn't go alone. They went in a pack. So obviously, if there's a huge merchant vessel with cannons, or even a fleet, you got a pack of wolves. That's why Romegas was called the Wolf of the Sea. You would have attacking from both sides, etc. So that would obviously higher the chances of success. One galley against a heavily armed ship, well, most of the time they wouldn't bother. They would just say, no, this is not
Go
happening.
away. Yeah.
I mean, and they're fast enough to get away from that.
And speaking of galleys and how they attacked, there was also a code, like very strict regulations on the galley. I mean, you couldn't, once you board the ship, once a Muslim ship or a Greek ship or whatever, or I'm saying Greek because if it was a Greek ship supplying a Muslim state,
there were some exceptions to the thing. Don't attack other crustaceans.
Yeah, exactly. So if it's okay, let's call it an Egyptian merchant ship. If it sees a galley of St. John coming to it, and the Muslim ship has a decision to make, and it says, okay, we resist or we surrender. If they surrender, the galley crew were not allowed to board. It was basically, okay, you've surrendered, we're going to board, we're going to take your stock, and we're going to let you live. Thank you, give us all your money, bye. And that's probably, not probably, Liam Gauchi would tell you that's how most of it happened. Because people say, oh my God, it's the Knights of St. John, they're going to really blow us out of the water. So they would surrender. And then it would be a peaceful exchange of assets, to put it diplomatically.
So this is like when the Mongols got to a city.
Kind of, yeah.
If you just submit, we won't destroy the city and kill you.
Exactly.
Exactly. Just give us all your stuff and 100 artisans, because we like artisans, and we'll go away.
Exactly.
But if you resist, you're all dead.
Yep. Exactly. And with the galleys, you're all dead part was not profitable enough. If you resist, some of you will die, unfortunately, but most of you will become our engines.
Right.
You're slaves.
Right.
So there was the slavery exchange. And slavery is a bad word because of it is a bad word. There's nothing good in it at all concept. in any aspect. But slavery in the Mediterranean was different than slavery in the Americas. Grandmaster de Valette was a slave on a galley for 1 year. Then his galley, which he was rowing on, was attacked. He was saved, and he became Grandmaster, a few years later. So slavery in the Mediterranean was quite fluid.
Let me interject just for anybody who's an American who's watching. If you've ever heard of Captain John Smith was a slave on a Turkish galley for a short period of time and escaped. And
so you've got escapes.
Came to the United States, or what was going to be the United States.
You've got escapes. You've got periodic prisoner exchanges. You've got, I think, as Franco said, it was very fluid. Nobody liked it when they were in that situation, but it wasn't like, okay, you're here, we're going to work you to death.
Well, and also it's not that if a Muslim corsair took you, it isn't necessarily that you were going to automatically be a galley slave either. I mean, if they take you back to Tunis or Algiers or somewhere like that,
especially
they're going to sell you.
especially if you
Yeah,
have
yeah, yeah,
technical skills and so on. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
So there's actually a book, and it's not in the room where I'd grab it, but called White Gold, which is about
okay,
Europeans being held captive
there you
in
go.
North Africa.
Mhm.
And there
That's
were
exactly.
Moroccan corsairs that would actually sail all the way up to southern England and just capture entire villages
Mhm.
and take them back to Morocco for sale.
Yeah,
So they think that over a couple of hundred years, maybe 2 million Europeans were essentially captured and enslaved in North Africa and the Middle East.
and that's how the Hospitallers survived in the 18th century, by keeping that balance.
Right.
Yep.
Exactly.
Like Grandmaster de Valette became a Grandmaster because a Hospitaller galley attacked the Muslim ship he was rowing on when
Right.
he was a slave. You know,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, status can change quickly.
yeah. And there was one story of the Corona Ottomana.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up because that is a great escape story.
That's like another Captain Jack Sparrow story.
So
You got
first,
this guy
yeah,
from Montenegro called Petar Zelilic. Actually, again,
this guy.
this is, yep, that's the guy. This is after he built his palace in Senglea, in a city in Malta, when he became like practically a millionaire.
He looks like Baron Munchausen.
He's basically a corsair, a privateer. He's, you know, a corsair, a businessman.
Mhm.
He started off, well, I can't remember how he started off, but he was a slave at one point on a huge Ottoman warship, the Corona
believe,
Ottomana, it was
this
called.
one, yeah.
It was, I think so. Yep. Yes, I think so. Yeah, it's got something like that. I think that was the one. Basically, it was part of a Turkish fleet. The admiral made the mistake of leaving it out of a port and went in a harbor to get supplies. And basically, I forgot how many slaves there were on it, quite a few. Christian slaves revolted under the command of this Petar Zelilic. They captured the ship. They took it to Malta. They say, "Hey, look what we've got for you." So they basically donated a huge warship to the Knights of Malta,
Which is a way to make a spectacular entrance. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
like here,
it also points out again the reach of some of this, because that certainly sounds like a Serbian or Croatian name.
it was from Montenegro.
Yeah. So there you go. I mean, which means he was actually.
Yep.
He actually came from the Ottoman Empire, but was Christian.
Yep.
Yes. So exactly, that's the fluidity of it all.
Yeah.
And basically, he lived as an expat in Malta, as a very successful businessman, a corsair, with corsair ships flying under the flag of the Knights, but as a private ship. The Corona Ottomana has a bit of a funny story. I think the Grandmaster at the time took it gladly off them, obviously, but I think it was used a bit, but then it sort of there's a paper written on it. I think they gave it away or sold it, or the French king.
It looks like a three-masted bark or something like that. So
yeah,
two gun decks.
Yep.
It looks like it's 2 gun decks and 3 masts. Yeah, it was a bit too expensive for them to keep at the time, so they sort of got rid of it.
Yeah, that's the sort of ship that a European navy would have.
And,
yes.
Yeah, and again, it's not the kind of ship that would be useful for their raiding, for example.
Right. I mean, it's going to have a big crew. It's going to
you need resources.
There's a lot of logistics to go into supporting that.
And they already had their sailing ships. They already had a system, a very good working system of sailing ships, and they couldn't afford to arm and staff another one. So yeah, but the story about this guy from Montenegro who was a slave and revolted in the ship, he captured the ship, and then he, became a corsair captain in Malta. It's like,
upward mobility.
And that's basically how things happened at the time.
Yeah.
Yep. Because by terrain, that's exactly right. Like, it's not the same, it's never an excuse for anything.
Exactly.
Okay, I believe there was another important captured ship, which was the Magrebina, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, that was the one where Romegas overreached. Let me look up the story because captain. Well, he was a captain. Fra, because the Knights of Malta weren't called Sir because it wasn't. There were English knights, but their title was Fra, so like brother,
Yeah.
religious.
Brother.
So Fra Romegas was his nickname. He was very successful when the Hospitaller Navy was still in its youth in the 1550s and 60s and 70s and 80s. He had a very long career. But there was, in 1564, he captured, oh no, that's when he captured the harbor in Morocco, Perron de Velez. So I'm just looking up he was superintendent of the papal galleys in the Battle of Lepanto, etc., etc. I'm trying to look up the part where he captured a huge Ottoman vessel, and it was carrying one of Suleiman's nurses, old nannies.
I believe it was the chief eunuch.
It belonged to the chief eunuch.
Sorry, the ship belonged to chief eunuch. Wasn't on it. But I believe it was the his favorite wife's nurse. I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I found it. Okay.
Okay.
So, he captured a huge Turkish galleon belonging to the chief eunuch of the Sultan. Already bad. It had 200 janissaries on it, so 200 commandos,
Elite
and they
troops,
lost.
Yeah.
It had a hold of 80,000 ducats. Anyway, the big problem was there was the governor of there was the governor of Cairo on it, and there was the governor of Alexandria on it, and the former nurse of Suleiman's daughter. And basically, Suleiman, that was the last straw for the Emperor Suleiman. It was like, okay, come on, guys. I mean, you could have attacked any other merchant ship, but you just had to take my biggest floating asset. And that's what made Suleiman say, I've had enough of these. I'm going to blow them out of the water. A year later, the Great Siege happened. So basically, was it Romegas' fault? Yes. I mean, he was just he was doing what he did best.
Not his fault, but he was the trigger.
I mean, I can imagine the staff meeting in Malta between the Grandmaster de Valette and Romegas is like,
I've got good news and bad news.
Exactly. Do you know what you've done?
Yeah. Here, I was just going to hold this up. So
can you move it a bit to the
white gold is the title of it. That's not going to help you a whole lot unless you can read it backwards.
Tom, can you move
it to your left? To your right.
There you go.
Exactly.
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
That's interesting. I'm going to look that up, actually.
Yeah, and the author is Giles Milton.
Okay.
So you probably couldn't read it, but it says the extraordinary story of Thomas Pellow and Islam's 1 million white slaves.
Okay. That's interesting to me because it gives the other elements of the other side.
That's why I got it. Yeah.
Because there's loads of books on slavery in Malta, etc. You know, giving the other side.
Right. So after Napoleon landed and kicked them out, and they went to St. Petersburg for a few years, and then
they fragmented a bit. St. Petersburg and Rome.
Yeah.
It was like
so it's interesting because I mean they can't really at that point it really has if they want to continue to exist, it has to be the hospital part, right?
Yes. That's a whole other talk in itself, how they survived. But to cut it short, the hospital, well, now they're still a charity. It's the oldest religious charity which still is in existence in the world. They have hospitals all over the world today. We have a common friend. Well, we know a few knights of Malta. One of them is also a fencer, so we're quite close to him, and he gives us the stories. And we look at his Facebook, and he's wearing the orange.
The surcoat and everything. Yeah,
just the orange, like tactical uniform with the cross of Malta. Anyway, so they split up into sort of two groups. One were the ones supporting Peter, the Tsar of Russia, who wanted to become the next Grandmaster, and he sort of became Grandmaster for 2 years, I think. By the knights that supported him made him Grandmaster. The other group went to Rome, which was probably the smartest thing to do, and went back to their boss and had the protection of the Pope. And that's basically, fast forward today, you've got one official constant line sovereign military order of Malta, which is the one in Rome, but it recognizes the Russian part and the British Knights of St. John, because obviously King Henry VIII happened. And so then loads of diplomacy in the 19th century. Basically, the SMOM, Sovereign Military Order of Malta, are the ones in Rome, where they survived doing hospitaller duties. And then the other offshoots sort of were acknowledged later, and they acknowledge each other now. What the hospitallers did after Napoleon, maybe give or take 20 years, because they were like a bit...
it was early
dazed
in his career. So
it was dazed. They were dazed for 20 years as an order. There weren't any grandmasters, there were lieutenants. Cutting a long story short, they became the fifth, also another diplomatic move, the fifth wing of the Italian military. They still are today.
The military corps.
Yeah.
The Navy, medical corps.
Yeah, the medical support. They are the official medical corps of the Italian army, the Italian military, because there's the army, the navy, the air force. So that makes them the fourth. Okay, fourth, maybe. Oh no, there's the Carabinieri, which are the civilian military.
That's actually funny you should say that, because I was thinking, I don't know why there would be an English group, because Henry stripped all of their possessions, but then I realized somewhere around here, I have a pin that came from my aunt, who was English, and it is for the St. John's Ambulance Brigade.
Oh yeah. I think Queen Victoria gave them back their status.
I had never made that connection before.
Yeah. Obviously, for a couple of 100 years, they did not exist in England. Basically,
right.
They existed in Scotland and Ireland, but in the English kingdom, there was a period where no, they did not exist. But then I think it's Queen Victoria. I'm not sure. Who gave them back even some commanderies. There's one of them I visited. It's in London. It's basically the Knight's Bridge. There's a...
Well, how appropriate.
Yeah. I can't remember exactly, but anyway, there's a hospitaller commander. There's there's a museum, etc. And St. John Ambulance is the British heir of the hospitaller order.
Yeah, the pin comes from World War II period. So,
I've got a little toy here, which I want. It was the sword I wanted to produce. I bought this a few years ago. It's a dagger, a hospitaller dagger. It's a real thing. It's but it has a serial number and everything. It's an 1890 issue hospitaller dagger. It was basically what was given to the hospitalers when they were on duty, medical duty, in a war zone, because that's what they still do today. Their mission is...
So is that pad? I mean, if it's 1890, it's well, I was going to say it's not a functional weapon. It's sharp and it has an edge, so it's a functional weapon.
No, that's a tool. Yeah, that's a function.
Yeah.
It's not a ceremonial weapon.
Yeah, but I mean, is it a replica of an older model or
No, that's it. That's
no. I mean, is that style from the 1890s?
Oh, yeah, this was a style which was used. It sort of gives you the Roman gladius sort of.
I was going to say, because it's a relatively short blade.
Yeah.
So,
no, it's obviously it was a time where guns were used, so this was a good tool, like a pioneer sword. You know, a good tool to have on your side. So yeah, it's an echo of a military past in an order which has a hospital duty. They don't use them today anymore, obviously, because it's silly to have a dagger on your side. But, and the biggest asset, the biggest weapon the Sovereign Military Order of Malta has today, and it's really strong, is diplomacy. They even have a seat in the United Nations, you know, as a state.
They issue passports, right?
They have passports. Yeah, it's a state. It's a state without land.
Yeah. Well, there's a fair number of diplomatic passports that are floating around. Yeah.
They can go into a war-torn country and offer medical services as long as they don't have. Well, that's why they shed their military aspect, because that was the only way they could survive after the Napoleonic Wars, where nations became nations.
Yeah,
and you know, and they became an NGO, a non-government organization, basically.
Yeah. So now, rather than competing with Suleiman the Magnificent, they're competing with Médecins Sans Frontières, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly. I've got the book somewhere. I can't find it. I'll put it up later. Yep, can't find it.
You should be healed by us, not those French guys. Yeah.
Can't find it. So yeah, there's a book about how they exist today, how they survived, basically. No more navy, no more galleys, no more corsair.
Hospital ships?
Not sure, actually. We'll have to ask our hospitaller friend about that. They still have a hospital in Jerusalem, for example.
Really? Right.
That's very symbolic.
Yes. It's, I don't want to say something blasphemous, but I think it's actually close to or the original one.
Seriously?
Not really.
Small. They have a website with loads of detail. It's, you know, if you SMOM is their, you know. But yeah, they have a women's hospital in Jerusalem. When I say women's hospital, it's obstetrics and, you know.
Gynecology.
Yes. Yeah, so.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's the exact location is where the original one was, but it was destroyed in 1457 by an earthquake. So yeah, okay, it's still in the same location.
Yes,
history does that too.
Hopefully with better facilities.
Hopefully
Yes.
with better facilities, yeah. But yeah, I mean, like,
but that is kind of cool. And I mean, it's funny because it looks like continuity. It isn't, but it looks like continuity.
Yeah, exactly.
Close enough, I guess. I mean, symbolically, definitely.
Symbolically, it is.
Yeah. They run hospitals in 130 countries, for example. You know, it's a charitable organization. I mean, like the Red Cross. I mean, the big ones you can think of is
next time I'm abroad and I get sick, I'll just say, take me to the Knights Hospitaller.
Yeah, if you go to Austria or to Germany, you see Johann the Saint John Ambulance in German, basically, and that's a branch of the Knights of Malta. And whenever I go to somewhere in Europe, I have this little game I do, which my wife, you know, humors me. And I go to I go and hunt the local priory or the local commander. And most of the time, it's still there. It still has the emblem and it's still operational. I have photos of me posing in front of doors of official hospitable buildings all over Europe with the flag of St. John over the door.
That's a great idea.
So it's a cute thing because they still exist, and I say, hey, look.
Yeah, my wife humors me that way too. I have pictures of me standing next to like parts of the USS Maine that blew up in Havana Harbor in 1898. Okay. Why there are parts in a public park in the middle of the Central Valley in California, we'll never know, but it's there, and I have a picture of it.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, the thing with the medical side of things is that they never really even sidelined it, even when they were doing all the fighting, all the reading and stuff. I mean, like, I think they gave significant contributions to medical science. I believe in the up to the time they left, I think the hospitals in Malta were some of the most advanced in Europe. Definitely the medical schools.
Yes. There was that aspect too. I mean, fortification technology and the research in fortifications was already avant-garde, and European countries looked at the hospitaller entity as like the go-to for fortification advice, and medically the same. Especially by the time they got to Malta, then when they made.
Well, I mean, if they're starting in the Middle East, in the early 12th century, you're going to have access to something that's a little ahead of what's going on in Europe. So
exactly, no, that was their edge. That they learned from the Middle East.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, another leading medical university was Messina in Sicily, which was basically exposed to the Arabic culture for hundreds of years, and the hospitals had that same kind of exposure. So, and they use that as, and they still do today, as their diplomatic muscle, basically, like we said in their homeless days.
Yeah. And the medical part gives them an entree almost anywhere.
Yeah. And today, different than at the time, it's done out of pure, humanitarian aid. It's right. There's no other. They're very strict in their neutrality and non-military. Non-military.
Well, I think you could argue that even in the early days that yes, they may have started in terms of taking care of pilgrims, but they didn't have to open it up to Jews, to Muslims.
No,
they could have been more rigid about it. There's nobody would have said that they had to.
Yes,
I think it would have. I think it mostly surprised the people that they did that rather than because the expectation would be that they did not do that.
Exactly. I think where they started from explains why, because they were officially founded in 1113, which was the Kingdom of Jerusalem, but they started in 1048 in Jerusalem. So they had a hospital in 1048, and that was under a Muslim.
That's pre-conquest.
So obviously they had to deal with the Muslim government.
Yeah. And I mean, there were some Western pilgrims going there anyway.
Exactly.
Even before the First Crusade. So
you can see, like, okay, we need a hospital for the Christian tourists who visit the Islamic Jerusalem, and we can also offer hospital services to your population. And when the coin flipped, they did the same.
Yeah,
because they knew it might have reversed.
I just wonder. I wonder what it was like for that institution during the first, at the sack of Jerusalem, when all of the descriptions are like the streets are knee deep in blood. What do you do?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they. Yeah, who knows? I mean, maybe the cross on the door protected them. Maybe. Maybe because it's a hospital. But we shouldn't think of the medieval, more than me, the medieval times as being like they were brutal, but there was an element of common sense as well.
Right. Right.
No, there was a lot of common sense. What am I saying?
Yeah.
Possibly
And
more than there's floating around today, to be honest.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just like
Yeah.
barbarian. So if there's a hospital and you're pillaging a city and it's a Christian hospital, you might need it in a few minutes.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, if you do break in, you're going to be dealing. Admittedly, you may be dealing with some locals who aren't Christian, who are still working in the hospital, but most of the upper staff, at least, and obviously a lot of the patients are going to be Christians. So
it was a religious order as well. So you're going to attack religious institutions. So
in fact, you kind of think they would have known that it existed before they got there, because people have been going there and coming back. So
yeah,
and who knows if it was involved in some dealings for the crusade. I mean, we're just floating.
But the point is that it actually existed as a hospital.
Yeah.
Really before it was a military order.
Yep.
Totally, yeah.
Exactly. It became militarized in the 1130s.
Yeah.
When obviously the Kingdom of Jerusalem obviously had the struggles it had with the surrounding Islamic states, and and the Order of St. John was receiving very difficult and annoying gifts like castles in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
So they had to weaponize themselves to defend these new properties.
Okay, hang on, because you did send me a picture of a castle in the middle of nowhere.
Crack the Chevalier. Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Crack the Chevalier.
That is a
I think
beast. That is a beast of a fortress.
That's I think the biggest one, and I'm not sure. I think they built that themselves, or probably they built that one. That was in the height of their power in the Holy Land era. Mm-hmm. There were many other castles which were given to them. I'm not sure if they built it or they sort of expanded it for sure.
By the way, Karl, just, we've said in the past that we don't want to do, or that we feel iffy about doing a stream on the Holy Roman Empire because it's too complicated. I also feel like the history of the Kingdom of Jerusalem might be in that group as well.
Oh, yeah, no kidding. It's not that I don't want to do it, because, I mean, they're both fascinating subjects.
No, I love to do it.
They would need a series of streams.
Yeah. We would have to have like 10 things on it.
We're not scratching the surface in 2 hours or 3 hours. It's like,
No.
In fact, I chose the Malta phase because it's simpler.
Yes. You've got nice, clean geographical boundaries and, dates, starts, ends. Yeah. Very smart. Very smart. Yes. That's because people had already gone, no, we're doing the Rhodes bit because it's even smaller.
Yes.
But I find the Rhodes bit is a lot less interesting, but partly because it's so contained, and partly because look, everything they need, they just need to go from here to here. It's fine, here to here.
Yeah, it's real close.
Yeah, and the Malta phase, they just have to go all over the place. All sorts of stuff is coming in. Things are going crazy. There's corsairs everywhere. There's pirates everywhere.
Well, and again, if you look at the movement, if you look at the distances involved, it's not that far, obviously, from Acre to Cyprus, and it's not that far from Cyprus to Rhodes. So you're all in the same neighborhood. So the expertise, the knowledge that you have from being in the northeastern Mediterranean, it's transferable. You suddenly go to Malta. Okay, it's still in the Mediterranean, but it's a totally different thing.
Yes. Yes. It's bordering the east and the west of the Mediterranean, which is like
it's right on that line that goes down from the toe of Italy through Sicily, Malta, down to Tunisia.
The Rhodes period is beautiful because it's the formative years.
Yeah,
it's not you could say they were already formed for 200 years in the Holy Land, but it's
transformational maybe rather than
it's more it's the island state beta version.
Right. Well, I think the whole thing is that from Cyprus to Rhodes to Malta is it's laid out for you.
Yes.
In terms of the process. Well, we didn't have any choice. We had to leave the continent, and here we are on an island. How do we adapt to that when we don't own the island? Now we own an island, but now we have to figure out what you do that is
Yes.
different when you own the island than when you're just sort of there on
Exactly,
suffer.
exactly. The
You know.
government structure evolved hugely on Rhodes.
Right. And
Um,
now you've got that in your back pocket, but now you're moving, what, 750 miles roughly, I suppose, to Malta.
Well,
Now
yeah.
the currents, the winds, everything is different. You do know how you want to start with the governmental structure,
Exactly.
but now you're going to have to build a superstructure on that. So it's really kind of tailor made in terms of, oh, here we are, and then here we are, and look at what's changed and how they've adapted, and
Yep.
then here we move again, and they've kept some of this, but now they've adapted, and now we're
Yeah,
here.
good point.
You know, so it's look, we all know it's really, once you get down to it, it's really messy, right?
Yes.
There's a lot of, you know, blood, tears, toil, and sweat involved. But because, you know, 3 of these are islands at least, it seems much clearer than it probably really was.
Yes, and actually, there's also a fascinating parallel, because when they were in Rhodes, they had, oh yes, there it is. They had a castle on the Turkish mainland, Bodrum Castle, which is in Bodrum in Turkey, and that survived for quite a long time as a hospitalier fortress on the mainland. You know,
Okay.
and then they lost it obviously eventually, but it was a very significant presence because it was like their little foothold on the on.
Oh, it's all, yeah, and they can go, oh, see, we haven't left.
We're still here.
Yeah.
And in Malta, the Charles V also had this annoying asset in Tripoli. He had a castle, the castle in Tripoli, and when he gave them Malta, he gave them Malta and Tripoli. Malta was easy because it was under his domain, and you know they just had to fortify it. But Tripoli was, you know, on the Barbary mainland.
But now Charles doesn't have to take the hit when it inevitably falls.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Grandmaster de Valette, who was quite, how can you put it, Karl? An arrogant badass.
An arrogant, hard-headed, psychotic, tactical genius of a bastard.
Yeah, exactly. Like a great leader for his time. Anyway, he did not want to. He was against staying in Malta. He wanted to move lock, on, stock, and barrel to Tripoli. He wanted the order to be in Tripoli, not in Malta, which was a bit of a mistake. Thank God he wasn't the Grand Master at the time. He was he was the governor of Tripoli. He was captain of the galleys, and then so there were factions.
That just seems like a bad idea.
Oh yeah, totally.
I mean, it's a bit too much. You know, it's like you're on the mainland. It's so that did not happen because they lost.
Yeah. Well, you know, outside of the fact that, you know, the Normans tried to do that too. They had, you know, Ifriqiya, and they held on to that for about 30 years, something like that. And then you just can't support it. It's you're going to get overwhelmed.
Exactly. Malta was easier because it had the lifeline with Sicily, etc.
Yeah.
And it had the sea.
yeah.
As a border.
So is Malta, or sorry, not is, I know it isn't now. Was Malta at the time that the knights arrived, was it self-sufficient in terms of food?
No.
Not at all.
If I remember correctly, Dr. Noel Buttigieg was saying us last time that the island has not been able to support itself completely since around the 11th century.
Yes.
Purely based on population size. There isn't enough.
So about the time that the Normans came down from Sicily.
Give or take,
yeah. I mean, water was always...
Water's a huge issue,
and deforestation. I mean, we had forests in Malta, I think, up to the Roman times, I think, give or take a few hundred years. And then civilization sort of took care of that.
There's a fantastic quote by Bradford when he's describing Malta. He's like, the trees are so rare that when there is one, it is used as a landmark.
Yes. In fact, I was mentioning the political situation when the knights came to Malta and they sort of removed the power from the local nobility. They sort of gave them the duty to take care of the wheat import from Sicily to Malta. But that was just like,
just to keep them
Just throwing a dog a bone, basically.
yeah. But basically, that was the lifeline as well.
Right.
Wheat came from Sicily. Without that, Malta couldn't exist.
No, I mean,
So
this is if that's late, they're right. That's how important.
So let me. This is kind of a weird question, but so I think I remember this. The population of Malta was essentially eradicated in the 8th century.
Oh, yes.
And then it was completely repopulated primarily with migrants from Sicily.
Yes.
Is that right? So, and then you have hundreds more years. So when the knights got there, what language were they speaking? Because
that's a good question.
I mean, because they've got to communicate with these people, right?
I'll be honest.
But Maltese is the only Arabic-based language in Europe.
Yeah.
So how are they communicating?
First of all, Tom, 1 second. Given the population movements, it's not just Sicilians, because there are connections with Spain, other parts of Italy, etc., etc. So there are people coming in from everywhere. The corsaring business was thriving way before that. So what languages they spoke? The only answer to the question is yes.
They were speaking early Maltese, basically.
Possibly, but again, early Maltese is Maltese is very similar to Old Sicilian. Franco will.
I think the academic safe word would be Siculo-Arabic,
right?
Which is basically what the Sicilians spoke after the Norman conquest, and what Malta followed Sicily and
pretty much follows the same development.
It's Lampedusa, which is Italian, is further away to Sicily than Malta is. So Malta's independent only because Charles V gave the Knights of Malta.
Right.
Because otherwise it would have fallen into
the Italian sphere of influence.
Other than that,
it was always an Italian culture and linguistic sphere of influence.
Yeah, it's the only. I think the thing that fascinated me about it was the idea of that literally it had emptied out and then been completely repopulated, and it's not. We know that the Greeks aren't really Greek. That they're largely Slavs who speak. Boy, there's a lot of Greeks who are going to be mad at me now. But the idea of the population being relatively eradicated and then repopulated is.
I think, if I remember correctly, 800 is the third time that the island had been completely depopulated. It's only the only one in historical record.
I remember it being multiple times, but which again you can do on an island, right?
Exactly.
It's easier on an island, I guess. But yeah, I just was thinking you're talking about a multinational force that's now going to a place that, okay, there's going to be some Spanish speakers there. There's going to be some Sicilian speakers there. There's going to be Arabic speakers there. So maybe actually it was a good fit, right?
I mean, the corsairs in Malta spoke any language. I mean, you have, I think Abolafia mentions it. There was the common language, of the Mediterranean, where Venetian merchants could communicate in Egypt, and you have this pidgin language sort of.
Do we have any idea
it's a
what
trade
that sounded
language
like?
Is what it is. Yeah.
Do we have any idea what that would have sounded like? It sounds like
Mela, Maltese.
Yeah.
No, I'm joking. That's a joke.
But maybe if you think about it, the commercial terms would probably have been either Arabic or Italian.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I mean the lingua franca of the time. I mean, obviously, the Italian would have been a dominant for sure.
Yeah,
and the Arabic
at least in terms of that. Yeah. You know, whereas like in English, the 100 most words that you use every day are still Anglo-Saxon. If the root population in Sicily was Arabic speaking or Siculo-Arabic, probably the same situation. The word for horse is still, what it was. But the commercial stuff, but maybe some of the war, the technology stuff would have been something else as well.
The Knights described the Maltese language as a Barbary language.
Well, it is.
Because they didn't understand it, and it sounded like Arabic to them.
If they heard someone cursing, then it would definitely have sounded super barbaric. And that's the last one.
Yes. Burr.
And then the local nobility would have spoken Italian because obviously they were part of the European Christian noble community, and that ironically kept existing till the Second World War, which changed things because the Italian was then looked at negatively by British Malta. But the upper class would speak Italian, the lower class would speak the grassroots language, which is the actual language. So I'm half Welsh, so I have also that.
Well, you really go for those outlier languages, don't you?
Exactly. I have a panache about. So the same thing.
Yeah. Now the Franco Davies actually makes sense.
Oh yes. I represent Malta in a way because father is British, mother is Maltese. I may have an Italian. Oh yeah, I do have a great grandfather who's Italian. Actually, there you go.
There you go.
It's complicated.
So that's Malta for you. It was always mixed, and even like Karl was saying.
Well, it's a crossroads. Just because of its geographical location, you can't help it.
Exactly.
Well, I need to go because I have a game in 15 minutes.
Okay. Well, to be honest, we've been here for almost 3 hours now, so this might be a good time to call it today. Or a night, in our case. So, Tom, thank you so much for joining us. Franco, this was massive fun. Thanks again for being here.
Great.
We probably need to abduct you again.
What's really scary is the swords are just within reach. So.
And
where else would we keep them?
Well, that's true.
Yeah,
they're meant to be handled.
Okay, gents. Thank you again so much, and Franco. Hopefully, we'll bring you on again because we have so much many other.
Thanks for having me.
Been a pleasure as always. And I guess
Thanks,
we get to beat each other up tomorrow. Bye.
Oh yes.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Good night, all. Bye.
Bye.